Daenerys Targaryen stood upon the high battlements of Winterfell, a mantle of furs clutched around her shoulders against the unrelenting cold. The bitter wind tugged at her silver-gold hair, sending it whipping across her face in pale ribbons. The ramparts of the ancestral Stark stronghold offered her a vantage from which she could see the vast expanse of the northern plains. It was nearly dawn, yet no hint of sun warmed the eastern sky. Instead, heavy clouds brooded low, threatening more snow. There was a stillness that did not belong to any ordinary winter morning, a hush that spoke of dread. The army of the dead was out there, somewhere, and the Night King was on the move. Daenerys looked down at the courtyard, where her gathered forces formed up in tense lines, the Unsullied and the Northmen standing side by side. Her face, once radiant with the pride and hope of a conqueror, carried the weight of recent grief. Only a few days had passed since Drogon, her largest and fiercest dragon, had been struck down by the Night King. The monstrous wound inflicted by an ice spear had been mortal, lodging deep in the scales that no ordinary weapon could pierce. She had watched, helpless, as Drogon crashed into the frozen earth with a roar that shook the sky, his mighty wings folding in final convulsion. The memory haunted her, replaying in her mind whenever her eyes closed and sometimes even when they were open. He had been her greatest weapon, her son, her living symbol of Targaryen supremacy. Now she was left with only Rhaegal, and Rhaegal was injured, barely able to fly, let alone unleash the same fury that Drogon once had. Even with one dragon still breathing, Daenerys felt the absence like a phantom limb, throbbing with pain at all hours. The emptiness that Drogon's death left within her was an echo that resonated with the old Targaryen magic, as if the bond between them still tugged on her spirit. Jon Snow, newly revealed as Aegon Targaryen, rightful heir to the Iron Throne, came up beside her. She sensed his presence before he spoke. He wore the dark leathers and furs of the north, face grave and set with determination. He had tried to offer comfort, but she had grown distant after Drogon's death. Not out of malice, but from the echoing shock that could not be comforted by words. Jon's hand hovered near the small of her back, a hesitant gesture. She heard the faint clink of Longclaw's pommel against his belt and recognized the subdued anguish in his eyes. They had come together in desperation to face the White Walkers, forging an alliance out of necessity. But under that alliance lurked truth, betrayal, love, and a complicated sense of inheritance that threatened to tear them apart at the seams. Jon turned to her, voice low. "They're out there," he said, as if the words needed to be spoken to take shape in the cold dawn air. "Scouts have spotted whites moving in small bands. The main host will be here soon." She did not immediately reply. Instead, she looked at the horizon, searching for any sign of the Night King's approach. Once, she would have soared overhead on Drogon's back, scouting the movements of her enemies with the confidence of a dragon rider. Now the skies felt empty, the wind colder. Rhaegal perched outside the walls, tail lashing restlessly, only half-healed from a glancing blow of another icy spear. He could never replace Drogon's might. Nothing could. Her gloved hands tightened on the edge of the stone rampart. Her voice was subdued, distant. "He took one dragon before and made Viserion his own. Now he has taken Drogon from me as well, permanently. But I will not yield. We face the end together regardless." Jon studied her profile. He saw grief etched there, but also anger. Her spirit still burned, a fierce flame that could not be easily snuffed out. "Dany," he began, pausing as he caught the flicker in her eyes at the mention of that familiar name. Sometimes she allowed it. Sometimes it reminded her of who she had been, or who she thought she was. "When the time comes, the dragon we do have left must be protected at all costs. The Night King is cunning. If he tries to kill Rhaegal as well, we might lose any advantage in the sky." She fought back a wave of emotion. "I know, but I will not hide him away. He must fight with us." Jon looked as though he wanted to argue, but her tone was final. They both knew that the war to come would require every weapon, every ounce of strength, even if they lost. But no words passed between them that might acknowledge the magnitude of that risk. Instead, they turned from the battlements and made their way down the winding staircase, passing men and women who bowed or nodded, their faces set in grim resignation. Once below, Daenerys mustered the composure that a queen must show, her posture straightening, voice steady as she addressed the gathered lords. Grey Worm stepped forward, eyes forward, unsmiling. "Your Grace," he said, "the Unsullied stand ready." We have positioned them around the walls as you ordered. The Dothraki are stationed beyond the outer trenches." Daenerys nodded. She turned to Ser Davos and Tyrion, who stood close by with a group of northern bannermen. "I want watchfires lit along the ramparts. When we see the first approach of the dead, you signal the archers. Fire arrows first, then we send out the Dothraki to harry the lines. Only then do the Unsullied advance." Ser Davos offered a respectful bow of his head, though he was no mere yes-man. Tyrion's sharp gaze flickered from Daenerys to Jon and back again, a sign of unspoken worries. Tyrion had known loss before, but he seemed particularly aware of the fragility of Daenerys's emotional state. Yet he said nothing. There was a hush among them, as though Drogon's death had stolen some essential part of Daenerys's presence. She was not defeated, but neither was she the same. That something in her eyes, a raging heartbreak, made her appear more dangerous and vulnerable all at once. The meeting dissolved into action. Messengers darted from group to group, finalizing positions. The approach of the White Walkers could not be more than hours away. Some men prayed to the old gods, others to the Seven. Still others offered up silent pleas to any god who would listen. Daenerys marched across the yard, flanked by unsullied soldiers, to where Rhaegal lay curled in the snow. The great green dragon's breathing was labored, his wings still stiff from the icy spear's graze. At her arrival, he lifted his massive head, eyes bright with recognition. She felt the tenuous bond they shared flicker across her consciousness. She had bonded more strongly with Drogon. He had been the first to hatch, the one who always responded to her voice with the most intense loyalty. But Rhaegal felt her sorrow. He let out a low rumbling that reverberated in her chest. She reached out and placed a gloved hand upon Rhaegal's scaled muzzle, a single tear threatening to slip from the corner of her eye. "We still have each other, my child," she whispered, voice thick. "They won't take you from me, I promise." Nearby, a handful of Dothraki warriors stood in silent reverence. They too had lost much. The fiery sea of Dothraki screamers that had once galloped behind Daenerys's dragons was now just a fraction of its former strength, many having perished in earlier battles or turned to the Night King's cause as whites. Yet they remained loyal, caught in the thrall of the silver-haired queen who had led them across the sea. When the sun finally made a pale appearance, peeking over the horizon like a timid watcher, Daenerys and Jon were already positioned on the field. The lines of men stretched into the distance, torches flickering in an eerie line. The tension was so thick that the crows dared not cry, and the only sound was the soft hiss of the wind across frost-laden ground. The scouts came galloping back, breathless and panicked. Their words echoed in the hush. "They're coming." A trembling moan seemed to roll across the plains, like the exhalation of some monstrous host. Even from afar, Daenerys could sense the presence of the dead. They came in their thousands, an unstoppable wave of pale, rotted forms, and at their head were the White Walkers, silent in their icy armor, led by the Night King atop the undead Viserion. Daenerys's heart twisted in fury and sorrow at the sight of that perversion. Her once-living child turned into a weapon of winter. It reminded her, all over again, of Drogon's fall. For a split second, her resolve wavered. Then she steeled herself. The living had to stand together or all would perish. Jon's voice rang out. "Archers, stand ready." A line of archers, Northmen and Vale men, raised their bows in unison. Torches were held to arrow tips, and the darkness flickered with sparks. Daenerys cast her gaze to Rhaegal, who shifted anxiously. Without Drogon, Rhaegal was her only mount, but the injury complicated matters. She feared lifting into the sky might tear open his wounds. Still, this was war. If they did not take flight, they had no chance of matching the Night King's vantage or halting the undead dragon in the air. Grey Worm gave a command in Valyrian, and the Unsullied formed their tight phalanxes. The Dothraki, restless with their araks and curved blades, awaited the signal to charge. Tyrion and Ser Davos were positioned on the walls, ready to command from above. Sansa Stark watched from a safe vantage, face pale but determined, flanked by Arya, who held her Valyrian steel dagger with an icy calm. There were no illusions here. This battle would decide the fate of the North, perhaps all of Westeros. The dead drew closer. An unearthly cry broke across the field as Viserion, the undead dragon, unleashed a torrent of blue flame, lighting the snow in an infernal glow. The Dothraki rumbled, some rearing their horses, preparing for the inevitable clash. Daenerys fixed her gaze on the Night King, who soared above the whites like a frozen god. The memory of Drogon's final moments battered her mind. She swallowed hard, then turned to Jon. "Stay close if you can," she said, voice firm. "We need to protect Regal." Jon's eyes flickered in worry. "I'll do what I must." She climbed onto Regal's back. The dragon grunted in discomfort but allowed her to settle in. She strapped herself in swiftly, her breath fogging the air. "Dracarys," she murmured, testing Regal's resolve. She felt him respond, the muscles beneath her quivering. Then his wings flared open. With a powerful lurch, they took to the sky, rising above the armies. Pain lanced through Regal's flank, but he did not falter. Below, she heard the booming war cries of the Dothraki. Their hoofs thundered across the plain as they charged, torches held high. The archers released a volley of flaming arrows that arced overhead like a swarm of fireflies before descending into the ranks of the undead. Some whites fell, but many continued, limbs or torsos aflame. Jon rushed forward with the front lines, Longclaw held in a white-knuckled grip. Grey Worm called out commands, ensuring the Unsullied advanced in disciplined ranks, spears bristling. The ground shook as the two forces collided. Steel clashed against the unnatural strength of whites, and the moans of the dead merged with the screams of the living. Blood sprayed the snow, staining it crimson. High above the chaos, Daenerys urged Regal into a sweeping dive, unleashing a column of dragon fire upon a thick knot of whites. The heat was immense, and the flames spread, scorching the front ranks. 100 or more of the dead were incinerated instantly, their icy bodies shattering under the intense heat. But even as the flames rolled across the field, more of the dead pressed on. They were infinite or near enough to make no difference. Daenerys' cheeks burned with fury, her heart hammered with the adrenaline of war. She thought of Drogon, he would have been at her side, scorching half the field with his enormous blasts of flame. She tried not to dwell on the difference. They had only Regal now injured and in pain. From the corner of her eye, she saw the Night King and Viserion circling like vultures. The undead dragon spewed its blue fire, striking the ranks of men. Screams echoed as flesh and steel froze in an instant. The living lines reeled back, momentarily unbalanced. Jon and Grey Worm rallied them, refusing to yield ground. Bolts were launched from scorpion-like contraptions set on the walls. The first soared wide, missing Viserion by several yards. The second found its mark, striking the undead dragon's flank, but the metal tip shattered on those hardened, resurrected scales. Viserion roared, an echoing wail of death. The Night King guided him with eerie poise, eyes fixed upon Daenerys in the sky. A cold fury radiated from that glare. She felt it through the swirling snow, a presence like living ice. The Night King might have wanted to kill Regal as well, but there was also a certain twisted satisfaction in forcing Daenerys to watch her children fall. Once he had taken Viserion, now he had destroyed Drogon, and he seemed poised to finish what he started. Daenerys refused to let that happen. She banked Regal sharply, forcing him to ascend out of range, though each flap of his wings made the dragon's wounds ache. In the swirl of wind, she clutched the reins, trying to find an opening for a counterattack. But the Night King descended below her, weaving in and out of arrow fire, calculating his strike. Below, the field of battle had become a swirling maelstrom of swordplay and screams. Jon slew white after white, hacking them down with the deadly Valyrian steel. When a White Walker on an undead horse emerged from the fray, its icy blade swung at Jon's head. Jon ducked and pivoted, their weapons clashing with a sound like shattering ice. Sparks flew. The White Walker's expressionless visage betrayed no fear, no hesitation. Jon pressed in, using every bit of skill gleaned from battles across the wall and beyond. Eventually, he parried a blow and struck the White Walker in the chest, fracturing its frosty armor. With a triumphant shout, Jon rammed Longclaw deeper, and the White Walker shattered into 1,000 crystalline shards. But for every White Walker that fell, there were countless whites still pressing. The living found themselves slowly pushed back toward Winterfell's trenches. Daenerys circled overhead, searching for a decisive blow. She saw an opportunity where the whites had clustered near one of the outer trenches. With a cry, she urged Regal down. The dragon exhaled a torrent of flame that ignited the tar-filled trenches, creating a wall of fire that momentarily halted the advance of the dead. The flames reflected in Daenerys' eyes, a swirl of orange and gold, but her triumph was brief. A screech from above, Viserion and the Night King dove in a blur of movement. Another javelin of ice materialized in the Night King's hands. Daenerys' heart seized with sudden terror. She remembered how quickly he had hurled that spear at Drogon. She pulled back on Rhaegal's reins, urging him to climb, but the dragon was too injured to respond with the speed of old. The Night King's arm snapped forward, releasing the spear, cut through the air, trailing Frost like a comet. Rhaegal twisted desperately, the spear missing his heart by a fraction, glancing off his shoulder with a rending of scales. Green blood sprayed into the air, and Daenerys felt Rhaegal's roar reverberate through her bones. Pain lanced her own shoulder as though she shared the wound. They spiraled, nearly crashing, but Rhaegal managed to stay airborne. The Night King, almost disappointed, conjured another spear. Daenerys realized with a dread certainty that if she did not act, he would strike again. She urged Rhaegal to gather what flame he could and unleashed it upon Viserion. Blue flame met red in a horrifying clash, swirling together in a pillar of steam and fire. The two dragons roared, locked in a lethal dance. From the ground, it seemed as though the sky itself had been set alight with dueling powers, one of life and heat, the other of death and chill. Then, in a move that mirrored the fateful day Drogon was killed, the Night King lifted his spear once more. Daenerys reacted a heartbeat too late, but Jon had anticipated the threat. Far below on the battlefield, he had begun sprinting across the snow, hacking and shoving his way through whites to reach a scorpion ballista that was still operational. He shouted to the men operating it, pointing to the sky. They frantically adjusted the angle, aiming at the undead dragon. With a sharp twang, a massive bolt streaked upward. Its iron tip pierced Viserion's flank. The undead dragon screeched, momentarily deflected from the attack. The Night King turned his cold gaze downward, flicking it across the battlefield in search of his assailant. That moment's distraction spared Daenerys from a second spear that would have surely ended Rhaegal. She seized the opportunity to climb higher, urging Rhaegal's battered wings to carry them away from the immediate threat. On the ground, men and women died in droves as the whites swarmed. Grey Worm barked orders. Tyrion clung to the battlements calling for reinforcement lines. The Dothraki charged again, arcs of fire from their Arak blades cutting swaths through the dead. The flames that Daenerys had used to create a barrier now danced dangerously close to turning into an encircling ring of fire, threatening to trap the living with the dead if the wind shifted. The chaos was unimaginable. Yet even in that chaos, there was a fragile cohesion to the defenders' determination. They fought on, forging alliances in blood, cursing the ice that claimed their fallen. Daenerys took a moment to catch her breath as Rhaegal hovered, fighting the drag of his wounds. She could feel the heat of the burns, sensed the blood seeping from his shoulder. If she pushed him further, she risked losing him too. The temptation to fling herself at the Night King in an act of vengeance was overwhelming, but her rational mind told her that doing so risked everything. What was the best course? The question hammered at her heart. She felt powerless for the first time since she had emerged from the funeral pyre with her 3 dragons so many years ago. Rhaegal let out a weary rumble and she stroked his neck gently. "I know," she whispered, voice trembling. "Just a little longer." She turned her gaze upon the field where Jon fought with a savage resolve. Between him and Arya, the White Walkers faced lethal opposition, their approach stymied in crucial spots. If Daenerys could hold the skies, perhaps the living might still stand a chance. She circled wide, searching for the Night King again, praying he would not conjure another spear from the very air. She caught sight of him on a small rise at the edge of the battlefield, Viserion perched in a swirl of snow. White Walker lieutenants ringed him. The blue flames that flickered in Viserion's throat cast a ghastly glow on the Night King's face. The horde of whites parted as if bowing before their dark master, letting him move forward unhindered. It occurred to Daenerys that he might attempt another resurrection of the recently slain as he had done at Harhome and the Frozen Lake. If that happened now, they would be hopelessly outnumbered. They had to prevent it to distract him if nothing else. She guided Rhaegal lower, ignoring the dragon's shuddering protest. "Dracarys," she cried, unleashing a concentrated stream of fire at the White Walkers around the Night King. The flames cut a burning swath across the ground, incinerating some of the lesser whites. The White Walkers scattered with inhuman speed, but a few were caught in the edge of the blast, collapsing into crystalline fragments. The Night King strode through the flames, untouched, an embodiment of chilling power. Daenerys' eyes widened at the realization that dragonfire itself did not harm him directly. Yet the surrounding whites burned, at least temporarily clearing a path for the Northmen to push forward. In the next moment, the Night King raised his arms to the heavens, as if calling upon the frigid sky itself. Daenerys' heart dropped. She knew what came next. Bodies littered the battlefield, thousands of them. If he raised them now, their victory would be all but impossible. She angled Rhaegal's head, letting loose another raging tide of fire, but the swirl of snow turned the flames to steam around the Night King. She had never felt so helpless. Rhaegal bellowed, fighting to keep the descent steady. On the ground, Jon saw the Night King's gesture too, and a roar of denial ripped from his throat. He tried to charge forward, but an entire line of whites blocked his path, their eyes glowing with hateful ice. Then it happened. The dead began to twitch and stir. Fallen Northerners, Dothraki, unsullied, and others rose with vacant eyes. Friends and comrades were suddenly the enemy. A wave of despair coursed through the living ranks as they faced the newly revived horrors. The defenders' lines wavered, threatened to break entirely. Daenerys felt tears sting her eyes. Even from the vantage in the air, she recognized the twisted faces of some she had known. She cursed the Night King with every breath in her body. Still, the living did not yield. Jon, Grey Worm, and the others rallied again. Arya, leaping through the fray, used her agility to dispatch multiple whites with swift stabs to the skull. The Hound braced himself against any who approached Sansa, covering her retreat to safer walls. Brienne and Jaime fought side by side, battered but unbroken. Blood dripped from their armor, yet they swung their swords, forging a path of steel. Tyrion watched from above, horror on his face, but he did not flee. He directed reinforcements, steadied the men. Daenerys recognized that her role was to neutralize the Night King if at all possible. Without Drogon's power, that task seemed monumental, but Rhaegal remained her only hope. She reined him in for another pass. This time, she aimed not just at the Night King but at the ground around him, igniting the fallen in an attempt to deny him more soldiers. The flames churned, and the Night King stepped back. For a heartbeat, Daenerys thought she had forced him to retreat, but the Night King turned his gaze skyward, and that silent, implacable stare froze her heart. He lifted his hand, conjuring swirling shards of ice that coalesced into another spear. Daenerys tried to dodge, but Rhaegal's injured wing made quick maneuvers nearly impossible. Across the field, a figure broke free from the throng of whites, Jon Snow. He sprinted toward the rise, ignoring the slashing claws and teeth that tore at him. His armor bore fresh rents, and blood dripped from a cut above his brow, but his eyes were locked on the Night King. With a desperate shout, Jon hurled a throwing knife, forcing the nearest White Walker to stagger back. He continued forward, determined to reach the Night King before that deadly spear found its mark. The Night King's arm snapped forward, launching the frozen spear at Rhaegal. Daenerys saw it coming with dreadful clarity. She tried to veer, but the spear whistled through the air, aimed at the dragon's already wounded shoulder. Rhaegal roared, twisting in anguish as the icy weapon punched through muscle and bone, pinning his wing to his flank. Daenerys nearly lost her seat, her harness straps the only thing keeping her from plummeting. Pain and terror coursed through her, but more than that was the horror of seeing Rhaegal impaled, his flight entirely compromised. He tried to keep aloft, but with one wing pinned, they began to tumble. Daenerys felt the rush of air as they plummeted in a spiraling arc toward the battlefield. She clung to Rhaegal, felt his monstrous heart hammering in his rib cage. She glanced at the ground rushing up to meet them, the forms of whites and men scattering. In a surge of desperation, Rhaegal managed to twist his massive body, crashing onto the icy plain with a ground-shaking thud. Snow and earth exploded in every direction. Daenerys was thrown from the saddle, her breath knocked from her lungs as she hit the ground. Pain lanced up her side, and for a moment her vision blurred with stars. Somehow she remained conscious. She rolled onto her back, gasping in the freezing air. Her limbs trembled as she forced herself upright. Rhaegal lay a few yards away, thrashing weakly, pinned by that awful spear. Blood trickled from the corner of his mouth, steaming in the cold. Their bond flared with pain. Daenerys felt as though a piece of her soul had been laid bare. She ignored the panic in her mind and scrambled over to him. She placed her hands against his scales. "No, no, please, stay with me," she sobbed, voice choked. She could hear the chaos of battle all around her. But in that moment, nothing else existed but her wounded dragon. His great green eye rolled toward her, and there was a flicker of recognition, of sorrow. The thunder of hooves made her turn. A band of wights charged at her, skeletal horses and rotted armor. Daenerys had no time to react, no weapon in her hands. She was vulnerable, kneeling in the snow beside Rhaegal. A white cavalryman lifted a spear, ready to skewer her. But before it could strike, a sword flashed, cleaving the white skull. Jon Snow barreled into the group, hacking left and right, scattering them. Grey Worm arrived a moment later with a handful of Unsullied, forming a protective ring. They shoved back the undead, stabbing precise thrusts at wights that threatened their queen. Jon knelt beside Daenerys, eyes wide with concern. "Can you move? Are you hurt?" Daenerys shook her head, tears staining her cheeks. "Rhaegal. The spear. He can't fly." Her voice cracked with heartbreak. She looked into Jon's eyes, and he recognized that the blow was more than physical. She was on the precipice of losing yet another dragon. They both knew Rhaegal might not survive long if pinned down. Jon glanced around, saw the impossible chaos, the dead pressing in, the ring of fire and bodies. Then he looked at the Night King, who was dismounting Viserion to stride confidently across the battlefield toward them. A wave of wights parted for him. "We have to keep moving," Jon said, breath-catching. "We can't let him finish what he started." Daenerys tore her eyes from Rhaegal, who gave a pitiful rumble. "I can't leave him," she whispered. But even she knew that staying there meant death for both of them. An unstoppable wave of the undead marched closer, ignoring the carnage as they pressed to fulfill their master's will. The Night King advanced, spear in hand, prepared to destroy the living queen and her last dragon for good. Grey Worm extended a hand, shouting over the din, "Your Grace, we must go." Daenerys realized she had no choice. If she died, there would be no one left who could direct Rhaegal, no one who could unify these forces. She leaned in close to Rhaegal, pressed her forehead to his scaled jaw, tears streaking her face. "Forgive me," she whispered. "I will come back." With that, she rose and took Jon's hand, the cold of his gauntlet biting into her palm. They stumbled across the battlefield, protected by the Unsullied's formation, every step a struggle through snow and carnage. The wights clawed at them, but Grey Worm and his companions struck them down with unwavering precision. Ice crackled underfoot and the wind howled with the screams of the dying. Daenerys felt numb, shock coursing through her veins. She had lost Drogon. Now Rhaegal might be lost as well. The weight of that realization threatened to crush her spirit entirely. Jon pulled her close. "Keep moving." His tone was urgent, commanding. She forced herself to match his pace. Behind them, the Night King arrived at the pinned dragon. In a horrifying moment, Daenerys glanced back over her shoulder to see the Night King running his hand along Rhaegal's side as if studying him, deciding how best to deliver the fatal blow. She felt a scream claw at her throat, but the chaos of the wights swallowed everything. Her vision was obscured by swirling snow and reanimated corpses. The last sight she had of Rhaegal was him thrashing weakly as the Night King lifted his icy blade. She wanted to tear free from Jon, to rush back and defend Rhaegal or die in the attempt. But Jon held her firmly even as the Night King's blade began to come down. A roar like an avalanche thundered across the battlefield. The ground shook with the force of some new onslaught. Daenerys' heart stuttered. At first, she feared it was the Night King's final blow. But then, in the swirling haze, she saw something else, giants. At least 2 living giants, clad in the skins of the free folk, led by Tormund Giant Bane. They crashed into the undead ranks from the flank, scattering wights with every swing of their massive clubs. Tormund roared a savage war cry, the red of his beard stark against the whiteness of the snow. For a moment, the line of wights parted and Daenerys' eyes widened in fleeting hope. Perhaps the arrival of more free folk reinforcements would buy them time. Jon urged Daenerys forward toward the safety of the inner walls. They clambered over heaps of bodies, stumbled past fallen men and women who moaned in agony. Every step was a raw torment on Daenerys' battered limbs. Still, the defenders fought. She could see pockets of the living scattered, pinned in small groups, some trapped by newly risen corpses. The entire battlefield was a ring of brutality. The fortress of Winterfell loomed behind them with walls blackened by flame, ramparts lined with archers who continued to rain flaming arrows. The snow was red with blood. Screams echoed in the wind. She could hardly process it all. Her mind flickered through images of Drogon's death, Rhaegal's last stand, and the unstoppable wave of the dead. The illusions she once held of sweeping across Westeros with dragons and liberation had turned into a nightmare of cold reality. As they neared the gate, Ser Jorah Mormont, wounded but still standing, rallied a group of Northmen to push back a mass of whites that threatened to overwhelm the entrance. His sword arm was slick with blood and his face was drawn, but he fought with unwavering loyalty. When he saw Daenerys and Jon approaching, a wave of relief crossed his features. He slashed a white across the chest, then barked, "Inside." "Hurry!" The gate opened briefly to admit them. Once inside the courtyard, chaos reigned as well. Wounded were piled near the walls, the moans of the dying underscoring the sense of horror. Sansa stood at the center of a small command post, pale but poised, giving orders to the few healers who rushed about. Tyrion was there too, his usually quick wit dulled by the enormity of the crisis. He rushed to Daenerys. "My queen, you're alive, thank the gods. We feared the worst when we saw you fall." Daenerys' stare was distant, her cheeks stained with tears that had frozen into tiny crystals. She spoke in a hollow monotone. "Rhaegal, the Night King, pinned. I had to leave him." The words sounded foreign to her own ears, as if belonging to someone else. Tyrion's face fell, but he forced a composed nod. "We still have to hold the walls. The men are exhausted, but we can't let up." The Night King, he hesitated, uncertain how to continue. Jon inhaled raggedly, addressing Tyrion. "He's out there. We need to regroup. If we can lure him closer inside the walls, perhaps we can trap him. But we can't do that while the whites still swarm in such numbers." Tyrion looked grim. "We've had trouble holding the outer defenses. The trenches helped at first, but now they've broken through in many places. The men are near their limit and we're running low on arrows. We've lost so many already." He caught Daenerys' eye and trailed off. She looked as though she might shatter at the slightest pressure. There was a momentary silence. Grey Worm stepped forward, bruised and breathing hard. "We must rally. The Unsullied will hold the gate. We can send out small squads to rescue any trapped defenders." Jorah, leaning on his sword, grimaced. "We need a miracle." Even as he said it, a horn blast echoed across Winterfell's walls. A sentry on the ramparts shouted, "Riders approaching from the west." Heads turned. Sansa paled. At first, no one knew if it meant more whites or something else. Then the gates opened for a battered host of Vale Riders led by Yohn Royce. Behind them rode a small contingent of Riverland's bannermen and stragglers from other houses. They had presumably heard the call to arms and come as reinforcements. The men wore expressions of grim resolve. Though far fewer than the living side might have hoped for, their arrival served as a spark of hope in the swirling darkness. Sansa immediately directed the newcomers. They split off into squads, some riding onto the battlefield, others dismounting to reinforce the walls. The courtyard bustled with urgent commotion. Daenerys watched it all with a numb sort of fascination, her mind still reeling from the heartbreak of losing Drogon and, very likely, Rhaegal as well. For a moment, she felt an almost irresistible urge to drop to her knees in despair. But the memory of everything she had endured, her life in exile, the scorching deserts of the Red Waste, the liberation of Slaver's Bay, rose up in her like a phoenix. She might be beaten, but she was not broken. Not yet. She blinked, her composure returning in increments. She clenched her fists. "I will not let the Night King take everything," she said, a spark of the old Daenerys flaring in her voice. "Even without my dragons," she caught herself, acknowledging the painful truth that Rhaegal might already be gone. "Even without them, I am still the blood of the dragon." She turned to Jon, Tyrion, Grey Worm, and Jorah. "We fight. If we fail, we die. But we make this cost the Night King dearly." Jon nodded, gripping her hand. "We do this together." They quickly forged a desperate plan. The newly arrived cavalry would sweep around the flanks, buying time for the remaining defenders to regroup within the walls. Daenerys insisted on returning to the battlefield on foot if necessary to confront the Night King. Jon argued that she should remain inside, coordinate from the ramparts. She refused, the fervor in her eyes unyielding. "He took everything from me. I will face him." Before Jon could protest further, Grey Worm stepped in. "If the Queen returns to the field, she will be targeted again. We must ensure her safety. We have few enough Unsullied left, but we will guard her." Daenerys' expression was set. "Let us finish this." Tyrion eyed her anxiously but gave a resigned nod. "Then at least wait until we can launch a coordinated assault. I will join the rampart to ensure the men hold their positions." Ser Davos will lead the archers. The moment you step outside, the whites will converge on you. You'll need every advantage we can muster." So it was decided. Within moments, the battered defenders reorganized. Archers readied themselves atop the ramparts, the Vale Riders moved back through the gate to take a defensive position on the field, and the remaining Unsullied, joined by a handful of northern bannermen, stood at Daenerys' side. Jorah insisted on going with her, ignoring his own wounds. He pressed his lips into a determined line. "I swore an oath to protect you, Khaleesi. I will not break it now." Daenerys offered him a look of gratitude. The gates were thrown open once more. Jon, Daenerys, and the small force surged back onto the battlefield. The storm of undead and swirling snow closed around them like the jaws of a beast. Immediately, the whites rushed to attack, skeletal figures launching themselves at the new arrivals. The Vale cavalry charged in from the flank, hooves pounding the frozen ground, smashing into the white horde. For a moment, the living gained ground, pushing the dead away from Winterfell's gate. Daenerys fought with a sword in hand, not her preferred weapon, but desperation gave her strength. She slashed and stabbed, cutting down whites that lunged at her. Grey Worm and the Unsullied formed a protective perimeter, spears flashing with lethal precision. Jon stayed near her as well, carving a path with Longclaw. In the distance, they saw Tormund and the giants still smashing ranks of whites, though they, too, were beset on all sides. The night was a cacophony of shrieks and clashing steel, punctuated by the flicker of flames and the roar of the wind. At the center of it all loomed the Night King. He strode through the carnage like an unstoppable force, pale eyes glowing with malevolent purpose. His White Walker lieutenants flanked him, their ice-forged blades humming with frost in the night air. The undead dragon Viserion circled overhead, occasionally dropping into a dive to spew blue fire on pockets of defenders. Wherever that fire touched, men froze and died, bodies shattered by the next impact. Daenerys could not think about how that might have been Drogon soaring overhead if things had gone differently. She had to focus on ending this. Jon pointed. There. He indicated a slight gap in the undead ranks, leading toward the Night King. If they could press forward, they might engage him directly. Yet it was a gamble to leave the cover of the cavalry's flank. Daenerys braced herself. "We end this," she echoed. Together, they waded into the fray, cutting down whites with near-reckless abandon. A wave of the undead converged, blocking their path. Jorah took the lead, sword clanging as he defended Daenerys against a savage onslaught. He cried out in pain at one point as a white's claw raked his side, but he persevered. Jon slashed another white through the neck. Grey Worm barked orders in Valyrian. The Unsullied advanced in a disciplined formation. Their spears skewered the dead in unison. Step by step, they carved a path closer to the Night King. Daenerys lost track of how many whites she struck down, her arms aching, lungs burning with effort. The cold bit into her cheeks. Blood soaked into the fur lining of her coat, some of it her own, some not. The nightmare of the living locked in mortal struggle with the dead felt endless. Then, suddenly, they found themselves within a spear's throw of the Night King. He stood upon a slight rise, the bodies of the fallen scattered around his feet. His White Walker lieutenants formed a loose semicircle as though daring the living to approach. Viserion's silhouette passed overhead, a menacing presence. Daenerys gripped her sword until her knuckles turned white. Jon glared, chest heaving. Jorah, Grey Worm, and the Unsullied readied themselves, though they were outnumbered. Every man among them knew that even if they succeeded in killing the Night King, the White Walkers were powerful foes capable of extraordinary feats. The Night King raised his blade in a silent salute, acknowledging the confrontation that had been inevitable since Daenerys first came north. No words were exchanged, none were needed. The final clash was at hand. Jon was the first to charge, Longclaw slicing toward the nearest White Walker. Their blades met with a crash that echoed across the snowy battlefield. Frost spread from the White Walker's blade, trying to envelop Longclaw, but the Valyrian steel resisted it, bright sparks dancing at the point of impact. Daenerys engaged another White Walker, her less. Steel meeting the ice blade. She felt the shock of the clash rattle up her arms, and if not for the adrenaline surging through her veins, she might have dropped her sword. She bit down on the inside of her cheek and forced her weapon forward, using every ounce of strength to avoid being disarmed. Jorah joined Daenerys, parrying blows that the White Walker aimed at her unprotected flank. Grey Worm faced yet another foe, the Unsullied forming up to hold back the press of whites that threatened to overwhelm them. The air was filled with the sharp ring of steel on ice, mingled with the shrieks of the dead. In the center of it all, the Night King waited, letting his lieutenants test the living's resolve. His expression was one of cold amusement, as though he delighted in the futility of their resistance. One by one, the White Walkers fell back or were shattered under the force of Valyrian steel. Jon was unstoppable in his fury, every strike honed by the knowledge that the fate of all humanity hung in the balance. Daenerys fought with raw determination, though she knew her steel was inferior. She relied on Yora's assistance and the synergy of the Unsullied. Ice blades clashed with spears, the Whites shrieked around them, but bit by bit, the living forced their way closer to the Night King himself. Then, the last White Walker lieutenant fell to a furious strike from Jon, its icy body exploding into shards that sparkled like glass. An uncanny silence enveloped the rise for a single, heart-pounding moment. The Night King stood alone, facing Jon, Daenerys, Yora, Grey Worm, and the handful of Unsullied who remained. His expression was unreadable, though that glint of malevolence in his eyes spoke volumes. He raised his arms, and Daenerys felt the air crackle with cold magic. A ring of frost spread out from him, swirling in the snow. For an instant, she feared he would resurrect the fallen again, but the living had already either burned or destroyed many of the bodies around them. Instead, the Night King lunged, preternaturally fast, his blade whistling through the air. Jon met him halfway, sparks flying as Longclaw connected. The force of the blow sent shockwaves through both men, if the Night King could be called a man at all. Daenerys tried to circle around to find an opening, but the Night King parried Jon's next strike and sent a wave of ice that swept her off her feet. She landed hard, dazed. Yora rushed to her side, guarding her from a second wave of Whites that closed in. Grey Worm thrust his spear at the Night King's flank, but the ancient creature twisted aside effortlessly, retaliating with a slash that cut Grey Worm's arm. The Unsullied commander grimaced, refusing to fall, but blood stained his uniform. Jon roared, pressing the attack, but the Night King deflected each of his strikes with unnerving grace. A swirling gust of snow whirled around them as if nature itself wanted to hide the final duel from onlookers. Daenerys dragged herself upright, sword trembling in her hand. She saw Yora fling himself into battle, trying to assist Jon. The Night King danced back, conjuring a shard of ice that he hurled at Yora. It struck Yora's shoulder, forcing him to one knee. A heartbeat later, the Night King slashed at Jon, who barely managed to dodge in time. The blow glanced off Jon's breastplate, sending him reeling. Daenerys locked eyes with the creature that had stolen so much from her. Rage flared in her heart, hot enough to banish the icy despair. In that moment, she did not care that she had only common steel. She was the mother of dragons, breaker of chains, rightful queen of the Seven Kingdoms. She would not cower, even if she died. With a cry that echoed from the depths of her soul, she charged the Night King, raising her sword high. The undead monarch turned, his face still eerily calm, and raised his blade to meet hers. The clash jarred her to the core. She struck again and again, each blow deflected with unnatural precision. For a moment, she caught him off guard, managing a shallow cut across his arm. Ice crystals formed in place of blood, fracturing across his pale skin. He did not flinch. Instead, he retaliated with a blow that disarmed her, sending her sword spinning into the snow. She stumbled, heart pounding, her breath a ragged gasp. The Night King advanced, blade raised for the killing strike. In his expression, she read the finality of death. She could almost feel the cold promise that soon she would rise as one of his own, a grotesque puppet twisted by his dark will. But in the space of that heartbeat, Jon launched himself at the Night King's back, burying Longclaw deep between his shoulder blades. The Night King froze, an inhuman hiss escaping his lips. Ice cracked along the length of Longclaw, and for a heartbeat, all sound seemed to vanish as though the world drew one collective breath. Then the Night King spun with impossible speed, knocking Jon aside. The blade tore free, leaving a gaping hole in the center of his torso. Frost and shards of ice bled from the wound. The Night King glared at Jon, his features contorted as if his control was faltering. Daenerys did not hesitate. She seized the nearest broken piece of dragoglass that littered the battlefield. She lunged forward, driving it into the Night King's chest, twisting with all her might. A keening wail erupted from his mouth, echoing across the battlefield like a thunderclap. Cracks of blue-white light pulsed through his body, webbing outward from the wounds. With a deafening crack, the Night King shattered into 1,000 pieces of ice that dissolved into the snow. In that instant, every White on the battlefield collapsed. The White Walkers who remained turned to brittle shards, blown away on the wind. The undead dragon Viserion, locked in mid-flight overhead, suddenly plummeted from the sky, his unholy life extinguished. It was over. The threat of the Night King had ended. Daenerys stood there, panting, her knees threatening to buckle. Her heart hammered in her chest. She looked around, seeing the Whites that had harried them now motionless lumps across the plain. The living forces stood in stunned silence, battered and bloodied, scarcely believing they had won. Jon slowly rose to his feet, clutching at his side where the Night King's blade had glanced. Yora collapsed to the ground, the ice shard wound in his shoulder, bleeding profusely. Grey Worm wavered but stayed upright by leaning on his spear. The hush of the battlefield was haunting. Bodies lay strewn in all directions, the snow stained deep red and black with blood and ash. Broken weapons jutted from the earth and the once glorious banners hung in tatters. Daenerys felt tears well in her eyes, but she held them back, scanning the field desperately for any sign of Rhaegal. Her chest tightened. She remembered the sight of him pinned by that spear and the Night King standing over him. With unsteady steps, she began weaving her way through the carnage, ignoring the pleas of Grey Worm and Jon to wait. The lumps of snow and bodies blurred before her eyes. She stumbled on uneven ground, her heart pounding in her ears. She feared what she might find. Perhaps the Night King had already ended Rhaegal's life. She forced herself onward, wincing with every jolt of pain, tears blurring her vision. And then she saw him. Rhaegal lay crumpled near the crest of a small ridge, the frozen spear still lodged in his body. His scales were dulled by snow and gore, but she saw the faintest motion in his flank, breathing, shallow and uneven, yet breathing. A strangled sob escaped her lips. She hurried to his side. Steam rose from his wounds, and his once fierce eyes were half-lidded, dull with pain. She pressed her hands against the spear, desperation giving her strength. Carefully, she began to work it free. Blood poured from the wound, and Rhaegal let out a shuddering groan. Daenerys stroked his muzzle, whispering soothing words, ignoring the stinging tears on her cheeks. Then Jon was there, kneeling on the other side of the dragon, helping her pull the spear the rest of the way out. Rhaegal roared weakly, his body convulsing. Grey Worm and Yora approached as well, though Yora could barely stand. It took all of them to haul the jagged spear free. When it was done, the dragon lay gasping, blood pooling in the snow. Daenerys pressed her forehead to Rhaegal's scaled brow. She could sense the flicker of their bond, faint and fragile, but still there. "We have maesters," Jon said, voice trembling with exhaustion. "We can try. I don't know if they can heal a dragon, but we'll try." Daenerys nodded, hardly daring to hope. "Yes," she whispered, her hand smoothing over the green scales. "We must try everything. He's all I have left." Jon hesitated, glancing at her with a sorrowful expression as if unsure whether to remind her that she had more left than she believed. But the moment was too raw. They were both bloodstained and traumatized. He gave a soft nod and gently rested a hand on her shoulder, a silent promise that they would do whatever it took. "Let's get him inside the walls," Grey Worm urged. "If we can stop the bleeding, he may survive." Together, they signaled to the living forces. A handful of the surviving Dothraki and Unsullied came to help, forging makeshift sleds and harnesses to drag the injured dragon into the shelter of Winterfell's courtyard. Rhaegal's growls of pain rumbled through the air, but the men pressed on, pulling with all their might. Once inside, the maesters and healers flocked around him, though they had little experience treating dragon wounds. Daenerys hovered at Rhaegal's head, murmuring gentle reassurances in Valyrian, tears of relief and terror mixing on her cheeks. In the hours that followed, the survivors worked tirelessly to tend the wounded, gather the dead, and extinguish lingering fires. The victory was complete, but at a terrible cost. Thousands had perished in the battle. The walls of Winterfell were scarred with burn marks, streaked with blood. In the courtyard, the moans of the injured underscored the quiet horror that remained. Daenerys refused to leave Rhaegal's side even as the healers stitched and bound his wounds with every salve and poultice they possessed. The dragon occasionally stirred, exhaling weak puffs of smoke. No one knew if he would survive. Jon, battered and exhausted, eventually approached Daenerys where she knelt beside her dragon. The courtyard was bathed in the pale glow of torches. Snow drifted lazily from the sky. Daenerys, still in torn and bloodied furs, looked up at Jon. Her eyes were rimmed with sorrow, yet a fierce determination burned within them. She reached out and clasped his hand, tears glistening. "We did it," she said, voice hoarse. "The Night King, he's gone." Jon sank down beside her, leaning against Rhaegal's flank. "We did," he affirmed softly. A pause lingered between them. They had achieved the impossible. The threat that loomed over all of humanity had been defeated. Yet the price was immeasurable. Daenerys' thoughts wandered to Drogon, the heartbreak she would carry forever. She remembered the triumphant bond, his roar echoing across the Dothraki Sea, his powerful wings carrying her across skies of Essos and Westeros alike. He had died so that this moment might come. For all their differences, for all the complexities swirling around thrones and titles, they had united and overcome the greatest darkness the world had known in millennia. She stroked Rhaegal's muzzle. "If he survives," she whispered, "then the dragons live on. My house lives on." Jon's hand tightened around hers. They will sing songs of this night, how Daenerys Storeborn refused to fall. How she and her dragons saved the world of men. Daenerys closed her eyes. She did not feel like a savior. She felt like a mother who had lost a child. Yet she also understood that her name would live on, perhaps revered by those who survived. Would that bring Drogon back? No, but it might ease the emptiness in time. She exhaled a trembling breath and leaned her head against Jon's shoulder. Outside the courtyard, across the battered plains, the once mighty horde of the dead lay silent, freed from the Night King's will. The White Walkers were gone, their hold on winter shattered. Fires burned through the night, cleansing the battlefield, reducing whites to ash so they could never rise again. Within the walls, the living huddled close, mourning and celebrating in equal measure. Heroes were born, legends forged. The next dawn revealed a landscape of devastation, but also quiet relief. The siege was lifted. The world was safe from the encroaching darkness that threatened to consume it. And at the heart of it all, Daenerys Targaryen remained, kneeling at the side of her injured dragon, the last of her great children, clinging to hope that he might yet live. She could almost sense Drogon in the swirling flakes of snow, a presence that would never fully leave her. Perhaps some part of him soared in the sky beyond, joining the spirits of dragons past. She had avenged him in the only way she could, by helping to end the man or creature who had slaughtered him. And so Daenerys allowed herself, for the first time since Drogon's death, a moment of quiet acceptance. She bowed her head over Rhaegal's scaled flank, pressing her cheek to the warmth that still radiated there. Her tears fell freely. Jon stood beside her, silent in solidarity. There would be time to speak of the Iron Throne, of the rightful ruler of Westeros, of alliances and betrayals. But in that fragile, precious hour, none of it mattered more than the simple truth. The world of the living had endured. Tomorrow would bring new struggles, new conflicts. Yet tonight, Daenerys had the right to mourn her lost dragon and cherish the one who remained. She breathed in the icy air, letting the heartbreak and relief wash through her in waves, until the pale light of the new dawn found her still there, praying to gods old and new that Rhaegal's wounds would heal, that the fire of House Targaryen would burn on in this battered, changed world. And in that silent courtyard, surrounded by the aftermath of the greatest battle the world had seen, Daenerys Targaryen closed her eyes against the first rays of a bleak northern sunrise, remembering the thunder of Drogon's wings, the crackle of his flame, the fierce, savage love in his black eyes. In her mind, Drogon soared once more, and she whispered, voice trembling with gratitude and sorrow, "Fly, my love, fly where no darkness can touch you." Author's note: approximate 4,460 words above, continuing below to reach 6,500 words, maintaining the narrative flow, no subtitles. The sunrise was gray with only a hint of gold on the far horizon. Despite the victory, Winterfell's walls bore fresh scars, scorched in places by dragonfire and battered by the relentless tide of the dead. Bodies were still being carried in from the fields, those of the fallen to be identified if possible, and the shattered remains of whites destined for the pyres. Men and women walked with haunted faces, speaking in hushed tones. The scale of the devastation was slowly becoming apparent, and with it came a heavy grief. Yet there was also a collective sense of awe that somehow, through unity and unimaginable sacrifice, they had endured. Daenerys remained near Rhaegal through the early morning, refusing to rest despite the urging of those around her. Her hair was matted with blood, her furs torn in several places, but she would not leave the dragon's side. Jorah brought her a cup of water, and she drank slowly, hardly aware of how parched she was. He, too, was pale from blood loss, leaning slightly to spare his wounded shoulder. Even so, he displayed that same loyal resolve, unwilling to leave her unguarded for long. "How fares he?" Jorah asked gently, nodding toward Rhaegal. The dragon's breathing was ragged, the gash where the spear had lodged deep. The maesters had applied ointments and bandages, though none truly knew how to treat a dragon's injuries. A faint haze of steam still rose from Rhaegal's nostrils each time he exhaled. Daenerys stroked a patch of green scales just beneath his jaw. "He fights," she answered hoarsely. "I can feel him clinging to life." A ghost of a smile touched her lips, fleeting and sorrowful. "He is strong, like Drogon was." Jorah hesitated, unsure if mentioning the lost dragon would send her into deeper mourning. But Daenerys merely sighed, her eyes distant. He was always fierce, my Drogon, and so full of life. I keep expecting to see him perched on the battlements, roaring his challenge at the sunrise. Her voice caught in her throat. She pressed her lips into a thin line, regaining composure. At least the Night King won't desecrate his body the way he did with Viserion. Drogon rests in peace. Jorah lowered his gaze, remembering the unimaginable sight of Drogon's final fall. He died defending you, your grace. A noble end for a dragon of his stature. It was a feeble comfort, but sincere. Daenerys did not reply for a moment. The wind rattled the torches around the courtyard, causing the shadows to shift across the ancient stones. Then she asked, her tone brittle, was it worth it, Jorah? All the suffering, the cost. I brought my dragons here to save the North from the dead. But now 2 of them are gone, and so many of our people. We prevailed, but at what price? He wanted to reassure her, to tell her that the realm owed her a debt beyond measure. But the words caught in his throat. The price had been steep, far steeper than anyone imagined. We can't know all the answers, Khaleesi, he said softly, reverting to the title he had used when first pledging himself to her. But without you, without your dragons, the Night King would have marched unchecked across these lands. Millions would have perished. You saved them all. Daenerys looked away, her eyes reddened with unshed tears. I only wish I could have saved them both, she whispered. Then she gave a small nod, acknowledging his words. We have a realm to rebuild now, and I must see that Regal recovers. Without him, she could not finish the thought. Instead, she let her fingers trace the warm scales beneath them. Footsteps approached from behind. Jon Snow came into view. He had washed most of the blood from his face, though the lines of exhaustion were etched deeply. He exchanged a brief glance with Jorah, who inclined his head and stepped back to give them privacy. Jon crouched beside Daenerys, placing a tentative hand on her shoulder. You need rest, he began, voice low. You haven't slept or eaten. The battle is done. The others can take care of. No, Daenerys cut him off. I won't leave him. I can't. Her voice trembled slightly, but her resolve was unwavering. Jon let his hand remain. All right, he said gently, but at least eat something. You won't be of any use to Regal if you collapse. She pressed her lips together, recognizing the truth of his words. With a weary nod, she accepted a small piece of bread and cheese from a passing handmaiden. She ate mechanically, hardly tasting it. Jon settled beside her in silence for a time. They listened to Regal's labored breathing, the distant clang of hammers as repairs began on the outer gate, and the low murmur of the wounded. It was a fragile peace, balanced on the edge of heartbreak and relief. Eventually, Jon spoke, his voice tinged with uncertainty. We should talk about what comes next. He hesitated. The North lost many men. House Mormont, House Glover, House Umber, all have suffered terrible losses. And your armies, the Dothraki, the Unsullied. They're diminished, but not gone. He cast her a gile. And see, there's the matter of the Iron Throne, Daenerys finished, her gaze drifting over the ruin around them. I came here to defend the living, but my cause remains. Am I still to press my claim when we're all so broken? Jon's jaw tightened. He had wrestled with his own identity since learning of his heritage. Aegon Targaryen. In the swirl of war, the question of who should sit upon the Iron Throne had been set aside. Now it loomed again, unavoidable. You have sacrificed much, he said slowly. Many in the North see that. They may be more willing to bend the knee if they see you as the queen who saved them. Daenerys' mind flickered to Sansa's wary gaze, Arya's silent judgments. She wondered if they would ever truly accept her. But her thoughts were pulled back to Regal, who emitted a rasping groan. She rested a hand on his flank. All I can think about is healing him, she admitted quietly, and burying my dead. Jon nodded, empathizing. We have to honor them. The funeral pyres will be lit at dusk. It's a lot of pyres. His voice broke a little. So many friends. So many good people. She swallowed, tears threatening again. I'll be there, Drogon. I have to find what remains. She felt a pang of anguish, remembering Drogon's body out on the field. He had been so large, so proud. She suspected that only a portion of him might remain intact, the rest torn apart by the chaos of battle. The thought threatened to shatter her composure. She closed her eyes, breathing through the pain. Jon squeezed her shoulder. We'll help you. You won't do it alone. Hours passed in a haze of exhaustion and sorrow. The courtyard filled with the bodies of the fallen. laid out for identification and farewell. Many were burned in mass funeral pyres. Others, lords and ladies of noble houses, were prepared for separate rites. By dusk, the air was thick with the smell of smoke and grief. Torches lined the makeshift funeral ground outside the castle walls, where row upon row of pyres had been constructed. Men and women gathered in their finest ragged cloaks, some missing limbs, some still bearing open wounds, to pay their respects. Snow fluttered down, and the flames danced across the faces of the living like spectral fingers. Daenerys stood before a large pyre, her posture rigid, eyes reflecting the flicker of the torch she carried. Beside her, Jon, Sansa, Arya, Tyrion, Brienne, Davos, Grey Worm, Tormund, and many others formed a somber line. Words were spoken, but they felt insufficient. There were too many dead to name, too many stories lost. In that sea of sorrow, Daenerys held herself together with a tenuous thread, her grief balanced by duty. She gazed down at the bodies laid out on the pyre. Men of the north, Dothraki warriors, unsullied soldiers. At the center, a massive shape covered by a black cloth, the remnants of Drogon that had been gathered. She raised the torch, the tears finally slipping down her cheeks. "You were my child," she whispered under her breath, voice trembling. "My strength, my fury, may your spirit soar beyond the horizon." With that, she touched the torch to the pyre. Flames caught quickly, racing along the cloth and straw, licking the blackened scales that remained. The heat flared, forcing her to step back. She watched Drogon's remains vanish into fire, a swirl of sparks ascending into the darkening sky. It felt like a part of her soul was carried up with that smoke, leaving a raw emptiness in its wake. Jon silently placed a hand on her arm. She did not shrug him off. She needed the small comfort. She heard quiet sobs from others, saw Grey Worm bow his head as the flames roared. Ser Jorah stood beside her, tears glistening in his eyes, silent in his sorrow. Tormund muttered a prayer to the gods beyond the wall. One by one, the pyres around them were lit, illuminating the night in a blaze of orange and gold. The wind shifted and embers danced across the snow. When the flames subsided to embers, Daenerys lingered, gazing at the ash that remained where Drogon had been. She felt hollow. Her mind flickered to Rhaegal, wounded but alive in the courtyard. That was the only solace she had. At length, Jon guided her gently back inside, the rest of the mourners dispersing to find rest or nurse their wounds. The great hall of Winterfell was quiet now, filled with those too tired to speak, huddled around small fires for warmth. Tyrion sat at a table, half a cup of wine untouched before him. He looked up when Daenerys entered, giving her a faint nod of respect. "Your Grace," he greeted softly, voice raw from hours of reading lists of the dead. "You should sleep. The night has been too long already." She sank into a bench, exhaustion weighing her limbs like lead. "I will," she managed, though she could not imagine finding any real rest. Her mind churned with images of Drogon's final moments, the flames devouring his body. Yet she had to keep moving forward. She was queen. These people depended on her. Tyrion toyed with the stem of the wine cup. "I have been thinking, after so much loss, the realm will look to you for guidance. You have shown them that you care for more than just the throne. This could be a turning point for how people see you." Daenerys said nothing for a while, staring at the flickering candles. Then, in a soft voice, "I came to conquer with fire and blood. But the price has been so high. I don't know if the throne is worth all this suffering." She glanced at him. "Do you think me weak for saying so?" Tyrion met her gaze steadily. "No, I think you're human. You have lost so much. But do not forget that the realm needs strong leadership now more than ever. If you abandon your quest, can you be sure those who would claim the throne in your stead will rule with justice or mercy?" She lowered her eyes. "You speak truth. But I'm so tired, Tyrion." He reached out, placing a careful hand atop hers. "Then rest, my queen. Tomorrow we can speak of the future. For tonight, let the realm sleep knowing the long night has ended." She exhaled a shaky breath and allowed herself to be guided to a small room prepared for her. The bed felt both alien and comforting, and as she sank into the furs, her mind buzzed with 1,000 thoughts. Sleep did not come easily, but exhaustion eventually claimed her, luring her into a dreamless void. Dawn arrived with bitter cold, but also with a sense of renewal. The dead had been burned, the whites and White Walkers vanquished. The living, what remained of them, assembled to count their blessings, see to their injuries, and plan the next steps. Daenerys rose early, dressing in a simple gray gown lined with fur. She walked through the courtyard to check on Rhaegal, who still lay in a specially constructed enclosure. The maesters had done what they could, binding his wounds with linen soaked in healing salves. He stirred at her approach, letting out a low rumble that was less pained than before. Hope fluttered in her chest. "You're strong," she murmured, pressing a hand to his neck. "Drogon would be proud to see you fighting on." The dragon blinked slowly, acknowledging her presence. She felt his breath warm against her. There was a long road ahead for his recovery, if such a thing was even possible, but he was alive. That was enough for now. A gentle voice behind her, "He looks better." She turned to find Missandei, who had survived the battle with minor injuries. The relief at seeing her friend alive was immense. Daenerys embraced her tightly. "You're safe," she whispered, fresh tears pricking her eyes. "I was so afraid when the whites breached the walls." Missandei returned the embrace. "Grey Worm kept me close. We mourn those we lost, but we still stand." "That is your doing, my queen." Daenerys nodded, though she felt unworthy of the praise. "We need to rebuild, Missandei. And soon we must decide how to proceed to King's Landing. Cersei still holds the Red Keep." Missandei's face grew somber. "Will we march south so soon?" A flicker of uncertainty passed across Daenerys' features. "I must speak with Jon, Tyrion, and the others. The realm lies shattered. Our armies are weakened. But if we delay, Cersei will only grow stronger. She betrayed us once, refusing to send aid against the dead. Now that the threat is gone, she will stop at nothing to keep the Iron Throne." Missandei lowered her gaze. "You will do what you must. But take time to heal, my queen. The people see your grief and they grieve with you. Yet they also look to you for strength." Daenerys brushed a hand across Rhaegal's flank, feeling the rumble of his breathing. "I will find the strength," she said quietly, "for the sake of everyone who believes in me and for those who died in this cause." The morning wore on with meetings and hushed discussions. Jon assembled a war council in the Great Hall, joined by Daenerys, Tyrion, Sansa, Arya, Ser Davos, Brienne, Yora, Grey Worm, and a few other key lords. Maps were spread out on a large wooden table, corners weighted by candlesticks. The ragged group stood around it, faces pale but determined. Tyrion cleared his throat. "We've accounted for most of the losses. The North has been hit hardest, of course. Many houses lost their lords and heirs. The Dothraki are nearly gone, and the Unsullied are halved in number. The Vale Riders sustained moderate losses, but they remain somewhat intact." Sansa glided a finger along the map, stopping at Winterfell. "We have enough provisions for the survivors, but not enough for a protracted campaign if we move south immediately. The supply lines are stretched thin, and the roads are treacherous." Jon folded his arms. "We also need time to rebuild. The North is loyal, but they're exhausted. If we march south now, we'd be vulnerable. Cersei would pick us apart." Daenerys listened carefully, her hands resting on the edge of the table. "We cannot wait indefinitely," she said, her tone quieter than usual. "Cersei already refused to honor our alliance. She will use this time to strengthen her position. By the time we reach King's Landing, she'll have bolstered her defenses, likely hired the Golden Company in greater numbers. We'll be walking into a trap." Tyrion grimaced, rubbing his temples. "If we do nothing, she fortifies. If we move too soon, our weakened forces could be slaughtered on the field. We need a measured approach." Yora spoke up, voice tinged with caution. "What if we propose terms? Show the realm that you were merciful, that you saved it from the dead. Perhaps enough lords in the Crownlands and the Reach might turn on her, sparing us some bloodshed." Grey Worm's eyes flickered. "She will not yield," he said flatly, thinking of Missandei's near capture and the betrayal on the battlefield. "She will only use negotiations to her advantage." Sansa inclined her head. "Be that as it may, if we show the realm that we extended a chance for peace, it might sway hearts and minds." Daenerys absorbed their words, her gaze drifting to Jon. "And what do you think? You were the king in the North, or you were? Now everyone knows you're Aegon Targaryen. Does it change anything?" Jon stiffened, avoiding her eyes for a moment. The revelation still weighed on him, a tangle of identity and duty. "I bend the knee to you, Daenerys. That hasn't changed. The realm needs a united front. If I claimed the throne, it would only splinter our forces further." There was a subtle tension in the room, as though some still questioned whether Jon should assume the crown. Arya's expression remained neutral but watchful. Sansa pressed her lips together, remembering their earlier mistrust. Yet they had all seen Daenerys fight, suffer, and bleed for the North. Her sacrifice had forced many to reconsider their doubts. After a contemplative silence, Daenerys made her decision. "We will not march south immediately," she said. "We will use this time to rebuild our strength, to let the wounded recover. But we will send envoys to the surrounding regions, reminding them of our victory over the dead, seeking allies. Cersei may plan her treachery, but we will not sit idle. We will gather swords and provisions. When the time is right, we will strike." She paused, her eyes drifting over the scarred faces gathered around her. We do this together. The North and the Targaryen forces, one host, one realm. We owe our fallen that much. Jon nodded in agreement. Tyrion exhaled, relief mingled with the weight of the tasks ahead. Sansa's mouth twitched in a subdued show of approval. The plan was set, though its path uncertain. They would linger in the North, heal wounds both literal and figurative, and begin forging a realm united under Daenerys Targaryen. When the meeting adjourned, Daenerys lingered in the hall, letting the others file out to attend to their tasks. She felt a gentle hand on her arm and turned to see Arya Stark, the young warrior with quiet eyes and a hidden deadliness. Arya studied her for a moment, her voice calm. I saw what you did. You fought for us, lost your dragon saving us. It must hurt more than I can imagine. Daenerys swallowed, uncertain how to respond. Arya's tone was not unkind, merely straightforward. It does, Daenerys admitted quietly. Arya nodded. You have my gratitude. And my respect. She hesitated, lips thinning. If you mean to be queen, then be a good queen. For us. For Jon. Daenerys locked eyes with her. In Arya's gaze, she saw the fierce protectiveness the girl had for her family. I will do everything in my power, Daenerys promised, feeling the burden of that oath settle upon her heart. With that, Arya turned and departed, moving with the silent grace of a cat. Daenerys watched her go, then left the hall herself, heading back into the courtyard to check on Regal. The cold air bit at her cheeks, but the sun shone brighter than before, glinting off the icicles that hung from Winterfell's walls. The day felt new, somehow, despite the sorrow that still clung to the castle like a shroud. A group of blacksmiths hammered away in the corner of the courtyard, repairing weapons and forging nails for the ongoing reconstruction. A handful of Dothraki who survived the battle prayed to their horse god in low, guttural murmurs. Unsullied patrolled the ramparts, still ever vigilant. Little by little, life was asserting itself over the memory of the dead. The specter of winter's gloom had not vanished, but there was a sliver of hope. Regal stirred at her approach, lifting his head slightly. He still looked haggard, but the color in his eyes was sharper. She gently caressed his muzzle, feeling the warmth of his breath. We remain, she whispered, tears threatening once again, though this time tinged with relief. You and I. She allowed herself a small, hopeful smile. Drogon's loss would never leave her, but she would cherish Regal with every fiber of her being. He was her child, too, and he still breathed. Suddenly, she felt a flash of memory. Drogon, newly hatched, perched upon her shoulder, squeaking at the world. So small then, so mighty in the end. She closed her eyes, letting the memory drift. That was the past. She had a future to build, for herself, for Regal, and for the realm. A future free from the terror of the White Walkers, if not free from the conflicts of men. She could almost sense Drogon's spirit in the wind, as though his fiery essence lingered. Thank you, she whispered, voice catching. Thank you for all you gave. The breeze stirred her silver hair. She imagined Drogon's roar echoing in the distance, a final farewell, urging her onward. In the months to come, Daenerys would face countless challenges, political, military, and personal. She would have to address the matter of Jon's true lineage, confront Cersei's cunning at King's Landing, and navigate the fractured loyalties of the realm. She would carry the grief of Drogon's death in her heart, a wound that time might soften but never fully heal. Yet the mother of dragons had endured fire before, reborn in the flames with new purpose. She was still Daenerys Stormborn, the unburnt, the breaker of chains, who had laid waste to the army of the dead at the cost of her most powerful child. As she stroked Regal's scales in the courtyard of Winterfell, she felt the stirrings of that invincible spirit awaken once more. She had failed to protect Drogon, but she had saved the realm from a night that would have lasted forever. Now, with Regal breathing beside her, she would rise again, forging alliances and reclaiming the destiny of House Targaryen. The winter winds howled around her, but in her heart, a dragon's fire still burned, fueled by loss, tempered by love, and ignited by the fierce determination that had carried her across deserts and seas. And Drogon soared in her memories, a guardian spirit that would forever remain a part of her. His roar echoed across time, a reminder that the blood of the dragon knows no defeat, even when torn, battered, and grieving. Daenerys Targaryen would move forward, forging a new chapter for Westeros, with the sorrowful knowledge of what she had lost and the blazing conviction of what she had saved. If anyone doubted her resolve, let them remember the flames that consumed the Night King, the funeral pyres that burned beneath the northern stars, and the queen who stood unbroken in their glow. The future was unwritten, a tapestry of uncertain threads. But Daenerys Stormborn, bereft of her fiercest child yet unyielding in purpose, would face it head-on, scars, tears, and all. And from the quietness of the northern wind, where the falling snow glistened in the dawn, Drogon's spirit whispered, "You are not done. The world still needs your fire." Over the days that followed, Winterfell pulsed with the hushed rhythms of recovery. The courtyard, once a theater of frantic battle, became a place of wounds and healing. Soldiers of the North, the Vale, and the remaining Unsullied mixed with the last of the Dothraki, all of them laboring in the lingering chill of the northern spring. Smoke hung in the air from the funeral pyres that had burned through the night, and ashes still drifted in the wind. Men and women wore bandages beneath their cloaks, grieving fresh losses while searching for glimmers of hope in a world freed from the terror of the undead. Daenerys Targaryen passed each morning beside Rhaegal. The dragon lay under a canopy of heavy canvas, ringed by braziers that gave him warmth, his once proud body laced with salves and poultices to treat the deep spear wound. Maesters hurried around him, uncertain whether their arts were truly helping, but determined to try. Some tested blends of wolfsbane, crushed fireberries, or other northern herbs said to draw out infection. Others examined the ragged edges of the wound, worrying over the damage to muscles and scales. Daenerys found herself softly whispering Valyrian lullabies at times, half hoping that the warmth of her voice might succeed where medicine failed. Rhaegal let out low, rumbling groans whenever the pain flared. Often he drifted into restless slumber, but his eyes would snap open whenever Daenerys arrived or if he sensed a threat. Over time, she noticed the flutters of progress, a slightly deeper breath, a less labored rumble, a moment in which he might nuzzle against her hand. These small victories stitched a fragile hope into her heart. She remembered Drogon's playful ferocity, the strength that had seen her through so many battles, and she vowed not to let Rhaegal slip away if it could be prevented. He was all she had left of her dragons, the living embodiment of Targaryen fire. Jon Snow often stood at her side, silent, watchful. He still looked upon her with that mingled admiration and worry. Why? Especially when she refused to leave Rhaegal's enclosure to sleep or eat. Once or twice, Daenerys caught the fleeting twist of guilt in his expression, as though some part of him blamed himself for the events that had led to Drogon's death. She never addressed it directly. She could not carry that weight for him. She had too much grief of her own. But in quiet moments, she would clasp his hand, letting him know that, for all their conflicts and the truths about his parentage, she did not hold him responsible for the tragedies they had endured. During those first days of uneasy calm, the lords and ladies of the North gathered repeatedly in small councils. A sense of uncertainty rippled through Winterfell's great hall. The Great Other was vanquished, but the realm still lay fractured. Houses that had once marched with Robb Stark were now battered beyond recognition. The Mormonts had lost almost all of their warriors, including their fiery Lady Lyanna, who had died slaying a white giant. Even the Glover forces were reduced to a handful of survivors, dazed by the cruelty of the night. The Umbers were all but annihilated, and House Karstark suffered so many losses that their holdfast might lie nearly empty. No corner of the North was spared. Other regions, too, had dispatched men, only for many to perish on that frigid battlefield. The Vale Knights had arrived under Lord Yohn Royce, losing a third of their number in the final stand. A scattering of Riverland's bannermen, carrying banners of House Tully and House Mallister, had ridden in at the last moment to bolster the lines. Their dead still lay among the heaps, many not yet identified. Across that ocean of grief, Daenerys sensed the shape of her own plan. They needed to rebuild, to replenish, to rally the realm behind a single cause before marching against Cersei Lannister. But how to unite a war-weary country that had just survived an apocalypse? Tyrion Lannister took charge of the immediate organizational tasks. He had men from Wintertown set to clearing rubble and digging latrine trenches farther from the gates to avoid contagion. He negotiated with farmers in the surrounding hills to purchase whatever supplies they could spare. Meanwhile, Ser Davos Seaworth helped coordinate the distribution of rations, ensuring that the wounded in the winter tents did not starve. Sansa Stark used her knowledge of storerooms and logistic lines to see that cloth, hides, and basic goods were fairly traded among the battered houses. She and Arya walked the ramparts each evening, conferring in hushed voices about defenses should any new threat arise. Among the first visitors to Winterfell after the battle was Yara Greyjoy. She arrived by horse rather than ship. Her fleet anchored off the coast near White Harbor and traveled north to offer her respects. The battered gates opened for her, and she entered with a small retinue of iron-born warriors, all clad in furs they had bartered for along the way. Yara strode into the courtyard with the briskness of someone unaccustomed to snow, cursing at the cold under her breath. When she saw Daenerys, she offered a curt bow, then eyed Regal. "I heard rumor of your victory and your losses," Yara said, voice even. "I'm sorry Drogon fell. My word stands, I swore to serve you if you broke our chains from Euron. I may have reclaimed the Iron Islands from him, but you gave me the chance to do it." Daenerys inclined her head. "Your loyalty is appreciated. Will the Iron Islands stand with us should we press south against Cersei?" Yara's expression hardened. "With Euron gone from our shores, we have breathing room. But my fighters are fewer than before. We took damage in the skirmishes at sea. Still, I can muster a few thousand men, and my ships are yours if you call." She glanced up at Regal's enormous form. "Would that we had all your dragons to strike at Cersei's fleet?" The mention of Drogon stirred fresh anguish in Daenerys. She pressed her lips together and looked away, stroking Regal's side. "We have what we have," she replied quietly. "That will have to be enough." Yara pursed her lips. "It may be. The tide can turn quickly when men see dragons in the sky, even one battered dragon. But the Golden Company is not to be taken lightly. Cersei has gold from the Reach and from what she stole out of Highgarden. She'll pay them handsomely." Her eyes flicked around the courtyard where blacksmiths hammered and the wounded groaned. "Still, it's clear you have no choice. Either you march or let her strengthen her hold on the Iron Throne. I trust you'll choose the former." Daenerys merely nodded. "Sooner or later, yes. For now, we rebuild." In the days that followed, ravens took flight from Winterfell bearing messages to every corner of the Seven Kingdoms. Some letters were penned by Tyrion in his refined script, others carried the more official stamp of House Targaryen. They announced the Night King's defeat and recounted Daenerys Targaryen's sacrifices, 2 dragons lost in the Great War for the living, thousands of Dothraki, Unsullied, and Northmen falling to ensure dawn would rise. The letters ended with a call for unity and invitation to send representatives to Winterfell to discuss the realm's future under the Dragon Queen. Tyrion carefully worded these missives to appear less like a demand for submission and more like a plea to restore order and peace. Whether they would placate the lords of Westeros, he did not know. Part of the realm that answered swiftly was the Stormlands. Gendry Baratheon, having been legitimized by royal decree before the war, appeared at Winterfell's gates less than a fortnight after the ravens were sent. He arrived with a dozen mounted knights bearing Baratheon insignia, though the sigil was newly embroidered and a bit askew in places, reflecting how hastily Gendry had formed his banner. He dismounted, his breath swirling in the cold, and approached with a respectful nod. He sought out Jon Snow first, but upon seeing Daenerys in the courtyard, he made his introductions with honest courtesy. "Your Grace," Gendry said, inclining his head. "I came as soon as I heard the news. My men are green, and Storm's End was all but forgotten in the wars, but we stand by the realm that ended the long night." A shadow of awe flickered across his features as he glimpsed Regal. Even wounded, the dragon was an impressive sight. Daenerys offered him a polite greeting. "Lord Baratheon, your house has a storied history. We welcome your aid. The Stormlands must be rebuilding as well." He nodded, his dark hair falling into his eyes. "Aye. Most of the lords of the Stormlands left for other campaigns or bent the knee to the Lannisters when I was still a bastard blacksmith. Now it's complicated trying to gather them. Some might turn back to Cersei. Others whisper the name of Stannis' old claims or Robert's history. But I mean to unify them under my name if I can. I owe that to the memory of all those who fought at Winterfell." Jon joined them, placing a hand on Gendry's shoulder. The two exchanged a brief smile that spoke of forged camaraderie in battle. "Your presence here means a great deal," Jon said. "We can't fight Cersei alone." Gendry dipped his head in acknowledgement. "I have a small retinue, but with time more will rally. For you, or for the Queen, or both." Daenerys studied his earnest face. So this was Robert Baratheon's last living son, recognized now by royal decree. She wondered if it was wise to trust a Baratheon, given the long hatred between her family and Robert's. But Gendry seemed genuine, and Jon vouched for him. At length, she offered a smile. "Then let us stand together." It was another strand in the fragile tapestry of alliances she would need. One afternoon, Sansa requested Daenerys' presence in the library tower, a quiet place away from the bustle of the great courtyard. The library's walls were lined with battered tomes, some half-burned when Winterfell had been sacked, others preserved through the diligence of the maesters. Sansa had cleared a small table near a window that overlooked the yard, and 2 chairs sat facing each other. Daenerys arrived, noticing Sansa was already seated, hands folded in her lap. The Lady of Winterfell seemed guarded, as always, though the presence of the undead threat had softened some of her earlier hostility toward the Targaryen queen. Daenerys sank into the other chair, feeling the ache of her muscles from her sleepless nights near Rhaegal. Sansa spoke first, voice low. "I've asked you here because we need to discuss the North's loyalty and the shape of the realm. The threat of the Night King united us, however briefly. Now that he's gone, many of my bannermen wonder what comes next." She paused, measuring Daenerys' reaction. "They fought for you or for Jon, depending on how you see it. But in truth, their hearts remain with House Stark. They want to be sure the North isn't just a pawn in someone else's war for the Iron Throne." Daenerys' lips formed a thin line. "I won't deny that my goal remains the throne. I was born to reclaim it, but I've never wanted to subjugate the North. When the time comes, I would offer you terms that respect the North's traditions and autonomy. I understand the North is vast, cold, and independent. I saw it firsthand." Sansa exhaled, glancing out the window where the men labored. "You helped save us from annihilation. That's no small thing. Many of the lords will still balk at bending the knee to a Targaryen queen, but perhaps we can find a path that doesn't lead to more bloodshed." Daenerys studied her, recalling the friction they'd had upon meeting. She sensed it still simmered, though reduced by mutual sorrow. "If we can come to terms that honor the North, I expect the lords will follow your lead. So I ask you, would you stand behind me, Lady Sansa, once Cersei is dealt with?" Sansa hesitated, her blue eyes keen. "If you rule justly, if you keep your promises, and if the North is not treated as a conquered province, then yes. I would stand behind you." A flicker of sadness crossed her face. "I've seen the cruelty of the South time and again. I don't wish it to be repeated here." Daenerys nodded. A fragile bridge of trust seemed to form, though it was not yet strong. They spoke for another hour, discussing how to provide food for the armies once they moved south, which northern houses might need gentle coaxing to bend the knee, and where new trade routes might be reopened to feed a battered population. By the time they parted, the tension had eased, replaced by the beginnings of a shared understanding. Sansa did not love Daenerys, nor did she idolize her, but she respected her enough to keep her mind open. Meanwhile, Arya Stark resumed her training in the courtyard, honing her reflexes. She could be seen sparring with Gendry at times, or with any soldier who dared face her unorthodox style. Her presence reminded everyone that she had felled White Walkers, that she was not a child to be dismissed. At meals in the Great Hall, she often sat close to Jon or Sansa, eating in silence, her eyes flicking around to observe the crowd. Daenerys would occasionally feel the weight of that gaze upon her, but it was no longer openly hostile. Instead, Arya seemed to evaluate Daenerys with a kind of guarded curiosity. Perhaps they were all learning to accept each other in this new era. Word soon came that the River Lords, reeling from the partial destruction of House Tully's leadership, were split on whether to support Daenerys or remain neutral. Edmure Tully, newly freed from Casterly Rock after some negotiation, was attempting to rally them under Daenerys' banner. In the Westerlands, however, the Lannister name still carried weight. Many small houses, impoverished by war, might accept gold from Cersei just to survive. From Dorne came no immediate reply. The Martells were all but destroyed, and a new coalition of Dornish lords had taken shape, rumored to be fiercely independent. Whether they would join Daenerys or exploit the realm's chaos for their own advantage remained unclear. In the midst of these uncertainties, Daenerys worked to fortify her alliances. She met with each northern lord who lingered in Winterfell, forging personal connections wherever she could. She visited the blacksmith forges alongside Gendry, praising their craftsmanship and awarding small tokens of appreciation to men who had proven their valor on the battlefield. She walked through the makeshift infirmary tents, offering a comforting word or a gentle hand to the wounded. At first, many eyed her with fear or suspicion, for the Targaryen name was still infamous in the north. But when they saw how she consoled the dying, how her eyes brimmed with genuine sorrow for each life lost, they began to soften. Some even knelt, murmuring words of fealty, moved by gratitude for her role in ending the long night. Jon was never far from her side, though his own duties as the newly revealed Aegon Targaryen pressed upon him. He had to address lords who questioned his true loyalties. Was he the king in the north or the rightful king of Westeros? Many of the Northern Bannermen, especially those who once rallied behind Robb Stark, felt betrayed by the sudden revelation that Jon was of Targaryen blood. Yet they also knew he had fought and bled beside them, that he had risked everything to protect Winterfell. Jon wrestled with his identity, often lapsing into silence when asked whether he would one day claim the Iron Throne. Daenerys, for her part, tried not to press him. She feared a rift if he insisted on forging a rival claim, but at the same time she did not wish to force him into renouncing something he did not even want. In truth, she sensed that Jon cared little for thrones or crowns. The realm was all he had ever wanted to protect. Tyrion noted the uneasy dynamic. One evening, as Daenerys finally retired to her chambers, small, candlelit quarters in the northern tower, he approached her with a quiet knock. She let him in, wearing a thick robe against the cold. A single candle burned on a table. She was studying a letter that had just arrived from Lord Royce, describing possible roads through the Vale for an eventual march south. Tyrion inclined his head. "I hope I'm not intruding, Your Grace." Daenerys gestured for him to enter. "No. Come in. I could use some counsel." He shut the door, crossing to the table. His face was lined with fatigue. "Every day that passes, we gather more food, more men. Yet the question remains, how do we move on King's Landing without a decisive advantage in the field? We lost much of it with Drogon's death." Daenerys glanced out the small window where the moonlight silvered the courtyard. "I've wondered if Regal might recover enough to be that advantage. He's healing slowly. He can walk short distances now, and the maesters are hopeful the wound in his shoulder will mend in time. But we don't know if he'll ever match Drogon's might. He may not be able to bear the stress of a long flight, let alone deliver fiery devastation on an army." Tyrion rubbed his chin. "If he can fly even briefly, it could scatter an opposing host. But the Golden Company are disciplined sellswords. They won't flee at the first sight of a wounded dragon. And Qyburn was rumored to be working on even more scorpions. Larger, stronger, perhaps based on that old contraption from King's Landing. With Drogon alive, we might have risked it. Now I fear the odds." Daenerys felt her throat tighten. Memories of Drogon soared through her mind. The day she flew over the Dothraki Sea, the first time she unleashed his fire on the slavers of Astapor, the time he shielded her from the sons of the Harpy in Meereen. "We must find another way, something to break Cersei's hold." Tyrion sighed, pulling a small scroll from his belt. "Lord Varys, who remains in the south in disguise, managed to send word. He's been moving through the Crownlands, quietly testing loyalties. He says some lords might turn cloak if they believe Cersei is truly vulnerable. But so far, she's kept them in line by intimidation and gold." Daenerys' eyes flickered with anger. "She sits on my throne through betrayal, while we mourn thousands who died saving these very same lords. Let them understand that their queen destroyed the dead. If their gratitude means nothing, then we'll root them out." Tyrion did not flinch from her frustration. "We must be cautious. A single misstep could lead to more suffering. We also have an opportunity. If they learn that the Night King was defeated but we have only one wounded dragon, some might calculate that siding with us is less dangerous now than it would have been if you had a flight of 3 dragons. They might think it easier to negotiate favorable terms with a queen who is not unstoppable. Oddly, Drogon's loss might make them more inclined to gamble on us, hoping that after victory, you'll not be able to enforce harsh rule with the same power you once had." Daenerys' expression darkened. "May they never discover how deeply Drogon's loss wounds me." Tyrion touched his wine flask, though it was empty. He set it aside with a sigh. "We can turn every adversity into an advantage, if we play it right. I've drafted letters to certain houses in the Reach, those who despised the Lannisters after the sack of Highgarden. Once we march south, we could bypass the main roads, gather them under your banner." She nodded, though weariness pinned her. "Write them. We have time yet to see if they respond. When the snows melt enough for passage, we move. I won't wait until Cersei hires half the sellswords in Essos." He bowed and withdrew, leaving Daenerys alone with her simmering thoughts. She stood at the window, staring into the night sky, imagining Drogon soaring amid the stars. A flicker of memory tugged at her heart. Her first flight on his back, the rush of power and elation. The longing felt almost physical. She closed her eyes, breathed, and let the pain settle, forging it into silent determination. Morning brought more signs of renewal. Green shoots poking through the snow, watery sunlight glistening off the towers. The final dregs of winter lost their brutal edge, hinting that spring might be stirring. Workers kept building improvised stables for the new horses that had come north. The battered walls of Winterfell were patched in places with fresh timbers. The outer gate, once smashed by whites, was replaced with sturdy oak. Snowdrifts that had once concealed the dead were now melted or dragged away, giving the yard a cleaner but stark look. People spoke with hushed relief, if not joy. One by one, more lords arrived. The younger Lord Serwyn, haunted by the knowledge that his small folk had nearly vanished under the onslaught of the dead, pledged fealty to House Stark and to Daenerys for the immediate future. House Reed sent word through a Crannogman messenger, declaring they would remain in the swamps near Moat Cailin but acknowledged Daenerys' victory. They were too ravaged by whites to commit more men now, but the gesture of respect signaled that the North was slowly, if grudgingly, accepting her. Daenerys recognized how fragile these alliances were. One rumor of her father's madness, one slip of her temper, and they might vanish. Jon took it upon himself to organize small defensive patrols around the area. A handful of whites that had not collapsed. Perhaps they had been trapped under rubble or pinned at the edges of the battlefield. Occasionally wandered out. These were easily dispatched, but the men who found them did so with trembling hearts. The memory of the undead army lingered, and few had the stomach to face even a single leftover horror. Yet the knowledge that they were no longer being raised en masse brought a flicker of solace. The Night King's magic was gone, that much was certain. Whenever Daenerys found a quiet moment, she returned to Rhaegal's side. If the weather allowed, she had him coaxed to his feet by half a dozen Unsullied who would carefully guide him for a few steps around the courtyard. He walked stiffly, tail dragging in the dirt, one wing half crumpled. But each day he managed a little further. Sometimes he turned his immense head to gaze at Daenerys, letting out a deep, rumbling noise that she interpreted as gratitude. The spear wound was healing, though a wide scar marred the once impenetrable scales. Occasionally, small sparks of flame would issue from his jaws if he felt threatened or agitated. That, the Maester said, was a sign that his internal fires still blazed. Weeks passed in this manner. The road south grew more navigable. Daenerys called another war council, this time in the crisp outdoors of Winterfell's yard, where Rhaegal rested within earshot. Jon, Tyrion, Davos, Yora, Grey Worm, Gendry, and several northern lords attended. Snow still dusted the ground, but the sun felt warmer on their faces. Daenerys spread a map over a large wooden table, anchoring its corners with stones. She gestured to the King's Road that snaked down through Moat Cailin, through the Neck, and into the riverlands. "We march by the King's Road," she began. "Our outriders will confirm where any Lannister or Golden Company forces stand. Lord Edmure Tully has begun calling banners in the riverlands. We'll see if that amounts to anything. If we secure the Trident region, we can threaten King's Landing from the north. The question is, do we risk a siege on the city walls, or do we attempt to draw Cersei's army into open battle?" Jon touched the map. A siege of King's Landing would cost thousands of innocent lives if Cersei uses them as shields. That city's population is starving and resentful, but her men remain well-funded. She might block them from leaving, forcing us to either starve them or storm the gates. Grey Worm's mouth set in a grim line. "The Unsullied will do what is required, but the cost could be high. We lost many outside Winterfell." Tyrion studied the route. "If we take the city by direct assault, Cersei will have scorpions trained on the sky. Rhaegal could be at grave risk. One well-placed bolt might be enough to end him. Still, a siege is no guarantee of victory. The Golden Company are professionals, and they will hold the walls. If we wait them out, we give them time to gather allies or muster more supplies." Yora leaned in. "We might consider a feint. Lure her forces into the field near the city, away from the walls. If Rhaegal is strong enough to provide air support even briefly, we might break their lines. Once her main force is defeated, the city will fall swiftly." Daenerys listened, balancing each idea. We know Qyburn is cunning. He'll have improved those scorpions. Even Drogon struggled to evade them on the open sea, and he was stronger than Rhaegal. We can't rely on fear alone. Rhaegal is still healing, and I won't risk him lightly. She paused, gazing toward the dragon, who lay dozing with half-lidded eyes. The group fell into thoughtful silence. Then, in an unexpected move, Davos spoke. "We have a secret weapon aside from dragons, Your Grace," he said, his accent thick with the memory of storms and seas. "The people of King's Landing remember the cost of war. If we can show them you are no tyrant, that you freed the realm from the dead, some of them may rise against Cersei from within. I know that city. I smuggled onions through its sewers once upon a time. The folk might be desperate enough to revolt if they see us as liberators." Tyrion nodded, catching on. "Yes, especially if we have men on the inside distributing food, or rumors that the crown is hiding grain while they starve. We can undermine Cersei's support base. If the city revolts, we could march in with fewer casualties." Daenerys considered it. That would require subtlety, infiltration. Varys might help, if he is still in the Crownlands as we suspect. But it won't guarantee a bloodless entry. Cersei won't release her hold without a fight. Still, it could save countless lives if done correctly. They debated the merits of infiltration versus a straightforward siege, eventually deciding on a two-pronged approach. Tyrion and Davos would coordinate with any sympathetic forces in the city, those who might smuggle messages, spread rumors, and sow unrest. Meanwhile, Daenerys would lead the main army south, consolidating allies in the Riverlands and Stormlands. When the moment was right, they would surround King's Landing, hoping to time the arrival so that internal rebellion would weaken Cersei's guard. If, by then, Rhaegal was flight-worthy, Daenerys could use him judiciously in targeted strikes. If not, they would rely on conventional warfare, trusting that Cersei's unpopularity might tip the scales. That same evening, Daenerys inspected Rhaegal again. The dragon was now able to stand on his hind legs without trembling. She felt a welling of gratitude for every tiny sign of improvement. So much hinged on his ability to fly, but she refused to rush him. She could not bear the thought of losing him too. As she stood there, Jon approached carrying a small chunk of raw mutton. He offered it gently to the dragon, who raised his head and inhaled the scent. After a brief pause, Rhaegal snapped up the meat, a wisp of smoke curling from his nostrils. Daenerys managed a small smile. "He's eating more. That's a good sign." Jon nodded, tossing another chunk of meat. His breath swirled in the cool air. "I've seen animals heal from worse, though never a dragon." He looked at Daenerys. "We leave soon. How do you feel?" She gazed at him, reflecting on the swirl of emotions inside her. "Afraid," she confessed softly. "Afraid of losing more, of failing, of becoming like my father in the eyes of these people. But determined, too. We fought to save the world from darkness. I won't let Cersei undo everything because we hesitated." Jon let the silence settle. He stepped closer, pressing a reassuring hand to her shoulder. "You're not your father. You saved these people. You saved me many times. And no matter what happens next, you've got the North behind you now, or at least, behind us. We'll face Cersei together." She considered him, noticing how the torchlight outlined his tired features, the small scar on his cheek, the new lines near his eyes. They had never truly spoken about his parentage or what it meant for their relationship. Did it mean they were aunt and nephew, or had love transcended that? She did not know. In this world, Targaryens had married siblings and cousins to keep their line pure. But that old tradition felt hollow to her after everything. She wanted a bond built on trust and respect, not on ancient dogma. Still, the knowledge weighed on them both. Perhaps the time for that conversation would come when Cersei was no longer a threat. She placed her hand over his. "Together," she repeated. She yearned to find some solace in his closeness, but there were eyes everywhere. The men and women around them looked to them as leaders, not lovers. She gently withdrew her hand and turned back to Rhaegal. "Let's see how far he can walk tomorrow. If he's strong enough to fly in short bursts soon, perhaps we'll have a more decisive plan." Jon gave a last stroke to Rhaegal's scales, then left Daenerys to her thoughts. In the distance, the forges rang with the clang of steel on steel. The shadows of the courtyard stretched longer. Before drifting to her chambers, Daenerys lingered, letting the dragon's warmth soothe her. She remembered the day she lost Drogon in a flash of the Night King's ice spear, how her heart had felt ripped from her chest. She would carry that scar forever. But she still had Regal. She still had an army and, albeit grudgingly, the North. Tomorrow, they would begin the long march south to reclaim her birthright. The wheels of fate turned, unstoppable as the change of seasons. Within a fortnight, the combined forces assembled outside Winterfell's gates. The final load of supplies was strapped onto wagons. Dothraki horses stomped the ground, their riders scanning the horizon with solemn stoicism. The unsullied formed disciplined lines, spears upright, eyes forward. The northern bannermen, battered but resolute, mingled with the Vale Knights who had come to stand under Jon's command. Baratheon men joined them, wearing new tabards bearing the crowned stag, Gendry's emerging symbol. Daenerys rode at the front on a tall white mare, draped in a cloak of pale fur. Jon was beside her on a sturdy northern horse. Behind them, a wagon bore Regal, who had consented reluctantly to be transported rather than fly. The dragon occasionally roared in impatience, spurring the horses around him to whinny in alarm. But the harness had been built with thick timbers, reinforced by chains, so that if Regal tried to break free, he might injure himself further. Daenerys couldn't bear to see him caged like that, but until he could reliably take wing without agony, there was no alternative. They needed him with the army, if only for the possibility of delivering a final blow when the time came. Sansa, Arya, and Bran stood atop Winterfell's walls to watch them depart. The last living Starks, each bearing the memory of their home's repeated ruin, looked on with guarded expressions. Sansa offered a nod to Daenerys when their eyes met. Arya lifted a gloved hand in farewell to Jon, who responded with a solemn salute. Bran's gaze was distant, as though fixed on something unseen, but Daenerys could sense a faint sense of acceptance in his posture. The gates swung wide, and the great host began its journey, the sound of hooves and wagon wheels echoing across the snow-laced ground. For days, they traveled south, forging a ragged line along the King's Road. Snow still piled in drifts, though the air grew milder with each passing mile. Occasionally, groups of small folk emerged from huts to gape at the army or to gather the bits of dried bread and salted fish the soldiers offered. Some recognized the silver-haired queen and murmured thanks or prayers for the defeat of the undead. Others simply stared in awe at the caged dragon, whispering old stories about Targaryens returning to the north after so many generations. When the host reached Moat Cailin, they found the ancient fortress half-flooded from melted snow. Broken towers jutted from the swamp like jagged teeth. The banners of House Reed fluttered amid the reeds, manned by a small retinue of crannogmen who guided Daenerys' forces through the safest causeways. Even so, wagons got stuck in the mud. Soldiers cursed as they tried to push them free. Regal, restless, bellowed whenever his wagon lurched. Daenerys dismounted to help direct the men, ignoring the mud that splattered her boots. By the time the last wagon cleared the bog, the army had lost precious days. Still, they pressed on, eventually crossing out of the neck and into the riverlands. Spring was more evident here. Green fields stretched on either side, dotted with wildflowers. The banners of local lords occasionally appeared on distant hills, bearing watchful riders who observed the approaching host. Some galloped away without identifying themselves. Others came forward cautiously to declare whether they supported House Tully's call or remained undecided. Edmure Tully, riding from Riverrun to meet the royal host, did his best to coax them. His gray hair and uneasy manner betrayed the years of captivity he had endured under the Freys and Lannisters. Nevertheless, his voice carried conviction when he spoke of how Daenerys had ended the Night King. "She lost 2 dragons for us," Edmure would say, pointing to the wagon that bore Regal. "That is how much she gave to protect our realm. How many kings and queens have made such a sacrifice?" Some lords wavered. Others pledged men on the spot. A trickle of river lords joined the host, swelling its numbers. Not enough to guarantee victory against Cersei's legions, but a start. Daenerys spent her nights in tents pitched alongside the men, only rarely using the small local keeps that volunteered to host her. She wished to share in her army's hardships, to show them a queen who was not distant. Sometimes she stepped away to check on Regal in his makeshift corral, which they erected each time they camped. She would feed him raw mutton or goat, whispering in Valyrian, encouraging him to mend. He responded with a half-hearted coil of his tail or a nuzzle against her outstretched hand. Hope flared in her whenever she saw the intelligence in his emerald eyes, but she knew the shoulder was still stiff and painful. On occasional days, they released him from the wagon, letting him attempt short glides around the camp perimeter. The first time he tried, he crashed clumsily after only a few flaps of his wings, sending men scattering. Daenerys rushed to him, heart-pounding, checking for fresh wounds. He had lost a few scales and bruised a flank, but no worse. Over time, his flight attempts improved, each one slightly steadier. Jon watched these sessions with a mixture of pride and fear. He understood how much Daenerys' spirit was tied to that dragon. He saw how her eyes lit with cautious joy when Regal stayed aloft for more than a few heartbeats, and how her hands trembled when he landed badly. Jon quietly ensured the men cleared an open area in camp whenever Regal tested his wings, so the dragon wouldn't crash into tents. Slowly, it became part of the daily routine: breakfast, training drills, flight attempt, council meeting, midday march. The army grew accustomed to the roars echoing across the fields. At Riverrun, they paused for a week. Edmure Tully insisted that the castle was an ideal rendezvous point for riverlords. The majestic fortress rose above the confluence of the Red Fork and the Tumblestone River, its moat glimmering in the pale spring light. Repairs from the Frey occupation continued, scaffolds lining some of the outer walls. Daenerys was granted spacious quarters in the keep's upper floors. She found it strange to exchange her canvas tent for a tapestry-lined room with a large hearth and a four-poster bed. She had grown almost accustomed to the rigors of the march. Throughout the week, more lords trickled in, bringing small forces from their fiefs. Men wearing the banners of House Blackwood arrived, though their ranks were thin. Most had perished either in the war against the dead or in older conflicts. Several lesser-known houses, like House Derry and House Vance, sent a few knights each. Every pledge heartened Daenerys, even as she recognized that these forces were small. Some might desert at the first sign of trouble. Others seemed uncertain, offering only minimal courtesy. Yet a gathering storm was forming around her banner. Tyrion convened strategy sessions each afternoon in Riverrun's Great Solar. Jon, Davos, Yora, Grey Worm, Gendry, and other key advisors discussed supply lines, potential crossing points, and the best route to King's Landing. From reports gleaned by scouts, they learned that the Golden Company was indeed massing around the capital, likely commanded by Sir Harry Strickland. Cersei was said to be in the Red Keep, though rumors circulated that she rarely left its walls. Qyburn oversaw the city's defenses, rumored to have more scorpions placed along the walls and on naval vessels patrolling Blackwater Bay. Davos scratched at the stubble on his chin. The city's full of tension. People are hungry, though it's not yet a full-blown famine. If we tarry too long, might be that the Golden Company tightens their hold, making it harder for any revolt to break out. Tyrion glanced at the map. We should move within the month. If we wait until the height of summer, Cersei's men will have entrenched fortifications. She'll have time to decimate any rebellious talk in the city. We want to strike before she can root out our agents. Varys will contact us if he can, but I wouldn't expect too much from him in terms of large-scale sabotage. Yora folded his arms. And Regal? If he's still unfit for sustained flight, do we proceed anyway? Daenerys answered firmly. Yes. We can't hinge the entire war on him. He'll join the battle if he can, but I won't wait until he's fully recovered. We've already lost valuable time. The men are restless and supplies will run thin if we linger. We must march on King's Landing while we still have momentum. Jon nodded, meeting Daenerys' eyes. Agreed. Another moon's turn of rest might do more harm than good. The men want to finish this. Tyrion steepled his fingers. Then we depart in a fortnight, no more. We push down the Gold Road or the Rose Road. The Lannisters once used the Rose Road to ferry grain from Highgarden to King's Landing. That route might be less defended now, but it takes us through territory that could still host Lannister loyalists. The Gold Road is more direct. We should decide which path gives us the best chance. Davos traced a line across the map with his finger. The Rose Road is longer, but we may pick up some disaffected Reach Lords en route, especially those who hated the Lannisters for taking Highgarden. The Gold Road is shorter, but it's historically the main route for trade and troop movements. Cersei will expect us to come that way. Daenerys considered the options. I want to deny Cersei new allies if possible. The Tyrells are gone, but their former banner men might help us out of spite for the Lannisters. Let's attempt the Rose Road. We'll gather what support we can in the Reach, then approach King's Landing from the south. If she's heavily fortified along the Gold Road, this may catch her off guard. Thus settled, they dispatched riders to confirm the Rose Road's condition. Plans were made, wagons prepared. Daenerys found herself yearning for a direct confrontation with Cersei, to end the tension once and for all. Yet she knew subtlety might save thousands of lives. The memory of the Great War for the Dawn, with its horrific casualties, urged her to avoid another bloodbath if it could be done. Still, Cersei had shown no mercy before, and Daenerys doubted she would now. On the eve of departure from Riverrun, Daenerys stood upon the castle ramparts, gazing at the moonlit river below. The current whispered along the stones, reflecting pale silver in the night. Torchlight flickered around the courtyard, illuminating the silhouettes of men on watch. She drew a breath of the mild spring air, letting the sound of the flowing waters soothe her. A soft step behind her signaled Jon's arrival. He leaned against the battlement, following her gaze. For a while, neither spoke. There was a fragile sense of peace in that quiet moment, the castle resting under starlight, far from the chaos that awaited them. He broke the silence first. "You leave footprints everywhere you go, Daenerys Stormborn. Not just in the snow, but in the hearts of the people who see what you've given up to protect them." She looked at him, a faint smile ghosting her lips. "I didn't do it for glory, or even to earn their love. It was what had to be done. My dragons were my children, but I could not stand by and let the world be destroyed for their sake alone." Jon nodded, shadows shifting across his face. "I know. You remind me sometimes of Ned Stark." He paused as though measuring those words. "He wasn't my father, but he raised me with that same sense of duty, doing what's right even if it costs us." She exhaled softly, turning her gaze back to the water. "It cost me Drogon. I can still see the ice spear striking, feel the moment he was torn from me. We were almost unstoppable together. Now I barely recognize myself. But I've come this far. I won't turn back." He rested a hand on hers. "Nor will I. I meant what I said. I serve you. No matter what the letters say about my birth, no matter who might whisper that I deserve the throne more. I don't want it. You're the queen this realm needs if you can show them the heart I've seen." She felt a thickness in her throat. "Sometimes I wonder, after everything, if my heart is too shattered to lead. But we press on." He squeezed her hand gently and she laced her fingers with his. They stood there a while longer, letting the quiet night wrap around them. The moon rose higher, painting the old towers in silvery lines. Eventually, Daenerys released his hand and stepped back. "Tomorrow we ride for the Reach." Another step towards Cersei. "Let's make sure it ends with the realm's freedom," Jon replied. They parted ways. Daenerys returned to her chambers, finding it difficult to sleep. The tapestry on the wall depicted a long-ago victory of House Tully, fish and water motifs swirling. She stared at it, thinking how so many houses had risen and fallen in the tide of wars, each convinced they were building a lasting legacy. Would her own legacy endure, or collapse like the Tullys, the Tyrells, the Baratheons? She pressed a hand to her chest, inhaling. One step at a time. Dawn would bring fresh challenges. True to the plan, the army marched from Riverrun at dawn's first light, crossing the broad fords and heading south toward the Reach. The mood among the soldiers was tense but resolute. Rumors circulated that they might face Lannister outriders or hostile remnants of the Freys. Yet the roads were oddly quiet, with only scattered villages. At these places, Daenerys' envoys left messages pinned to doors. The Dragon Queen marches for the good of all. Join her or stand aside. Scouts rode ahead, sending back reports that some minor lords of the Reach had begun to stir at Daenerys' approach. Many had grown resentful of the Lannisters after Highgarden's fall. The Tyrell names still commanded loyalty, even in absence of a living Tyrell to lead them. Yet there were also mercenaries in the fields, presumably hired by local Lannister supporters. Skirmishes erupted. The Baratheon knights, hungry to prove their worth, took the lead in a few of these engagements, sometimes returning with captured men who had been paid by an unknown sponsor, likely one of Cersei's agents. The captives told wild tales of hidden gold, orders to sabotage Daenerys' supply wagons. It was a reminder that even this approach would not be peaceful. When they reached the outer territories once held by House Tarly, the sight of burned fields and abandoned farmsteads made Daenerys recall the day she had confronted Randyll Tarly and his son Dickon, executing them by dragonfire for refusing to bend the knee. Drogon had roared triumph that day. She felt a pang, remembering how alive and unstoppable he'd seemed. Some among the older soldiers eyed her warily, recalling that incident. But Tyrion had carefully spun that story, framing it as a necessary demonstration of strength in a land ravaged by Lannister oppression. Now, with Drogon gone, that memory felt more bitter than triumphant. A detachment of 100 men bearing House Rowan's sigil approached under a flag of truce. They offered guarded loyalty to the Dragon Queen, explaining that House Rowan of Golden Grove had loathed the Lannisters' betrayal of the Tyrells. Daenerys assured them they would be rewarded in the new realm. She asked if they had knowledge of any direct route around Lannister outposts. The Rowan men provided guides, who led the army down less traveled roads, circumventing the main highways. Days passed in a blur of dusty marches and watchful nights. The dryness of the climate became apparent as they neared the heart of the Reach. These lands should have been lush farmland, but spring had come with lesser rains. They made camp one afternoon near an old orchard that had survived the wars, the peach and apple trees bursting with white blossoms. It was a striking contrast to the exhaustion that weighed on the men. Daenerys ordered a brief rest. Tents appeared among the trees, horses grazed on new grass, and men bathed in a nearby stream. Rhaegal was carefully unhitched and allowed to stretch his wings under close guard. Daenerys stood by as he flapped them experimentally. The ground shook with each heavy beat, scattering blossoms. He managed to lift a few feet off the earth, only to land again with a pained grunt. Still, the fact that he tried filled her with cautious optimism. That evening, as the sky turned lilac, Jon found Daenerys walking among the blossom-laden branches, seeking a moment of quiet. The fragrance of the orchard was unexpectedly soothing. He approached with a small skin of watered wine. She took it, sipping, letting the mild warmth flow through her. Their footsteps rustled in the soft grass. Jon cleared his throat. "I heard from the scouts. We're only a week's march from the outskirts of King's Landing, if we maintain our pace. 2 if we linger. The men are weary, but morale is still decent. They know we're close now." She studied him. "And Cersei's forces? Are they massing to meet us in open battle?" He nodded. "We've had reports that a sizable host of the Golden Company is stationed along the Rose Road, about 10 miles from the city. They might be preparing entrenchments. There's also rumor that part of her city guard stands behind them. If they block our approach, we'll have to either fight or find another route, losing time." Daenerys's gaze shifted to the horizon, where the sky darkened. "We can't afford to lose time. I'd prefer to face them in the field than give them the advantage of fortifying within the city walls." Jon agreed quietly. "We plan to keep scouting. If they move to engage us, we'll choose ground that favors us. The Riverlords and the Stormlanders will be on our left flank, the Unsullied and Dothraki at the center, the Northern men and Vale Knights on the right. Gendry's men and the row of crossbowmen can stand behind the center. I'll coordinate with Grey Worm and Yora for details." She considered the formation, picturing the lines arrayed. "And Rhaegal?" Jon hesitated. "Up to you, Daenerys. If he can fly at all, he might scatter cavalry. But if you fear losing him," he trailed off, aware of how raw that wound remained. She sucked in a breath. "I won't risk him in a direct charge if it looks impossible. But if the tide turns against us, I may have no choice. He's recovered enough to stay airborne for short bursts. If that can break their lines, we might save lives overall." Jon placed a tentative hand on her arm. "I'd hate to see you lose him, too." Her gaze flickered with grief. "So would I. But we march all this way, what use is a dragon if not to tip the scales when needed?" Jon gave a reluctant nod. "We'll do everything we can to protect him. Our archers will watch for scorpions, try to target them first." She sighed, turning her face to the blossoms overhead, the fragrance bittersweet. "The last time I used dragons in an open battle, I felt unstoppable. Now I'm terrified. Every scorpion bolt, every cunning tactic could be Drogon's fate repeated." Jon's hand slid down to grasp hers gently, offering what comfort he could. "We have each other. And the men follow you. Don't forget that. You aren't alone." Their eyes met in the quiet orchard. Daenerys felt the surge of emotion that she had tried to bury ever since learning of his Targaryen blood. Her heart recognized him in a way that defied logic. Perhaps it was the memory of how he had stood beside her in the fight for the living, or the sincerity in his dark eyes when he pledged himself to her cause. Or perhaps it was simply that in a world of shifting alliances, his presence felt like the one constant. She squeezed his hand back. "We face this together." They lingered, letting the orchard's gentle hush envelop them, a small refuge before the storm of war. Overhead, the moon grew bright, shining through the pale petals. In the distance, they could hear the low rumble of Regal's breathing and the distant calls of men around cookfires. The final battle for the Iron Throne loomed ever closer, the shadow of King's Landing only days away. When dawn broke, a golden light spilled over the orchard. The combined host packed tents and resumed the march, forging steadily onward. Each day they drew closer to the capital and the tension thickened. The roads widened, revealing more traffic, merchants, refugees, and a handful of travelers fleeing the city. Some spoke of famine, others of fresh atrocities ordered by Cersei. Daenerys' men offered them bread where possible, sowing seeds of goodwill. Rumors spread. The Dragon Queen was coming, wounded but unbowed, leading an alliance of Northerners, Riverlanders, and Stormlanders. Some insisted she had only one dragon left, others claimed she had thousands. Myths always preceded reality. At last, the outskirts of King's Landing came into view from the crest of a low rise. Smoke from the city's numerous chimneys smudged the horizon. The old fields surrounding it, once farmland that fed the capital, were half barren, dotted with makeshift dwellings. The Rose Road stretched forward, meeting the massive city walls that glowed under the morning sun. The sea glimmered beyond. Daenerys halted her army on the slope, letting her captains ride out to scout. The city's gates remained closed. From the walls, banners bearing the golden lion of House Lannister drooped in the mild breeze, and scorpions were visibly mounted at intervals, glinting menacingly in the sun. Tyrion cantered up on a horse, pulling alongside Daenerys and Jon. He pointed with a gloved hand. "Look there. The Golden Company has indeed set up a forward position outside the city. Earthworks, sharpened stakes. They must know we're coming." Through a spyglass, Jon confirmed it. Thousands of men. Cavalry to the rear, infantry in front, pikes at the ready. War elephants too. Not many, but I see at least a few silhouettes. This is no small force. Daenerys felt a quiver of dread. She knew the Golden Company's reputation for discipline, for never breaking a contract. They would not flee in terror as lesser forces might. "We outnumber them, do we not?" Tyrion pursed his lips. "Potentially, yes. But they're fresh, while our men have marched a long way and fought the undead. We're not exactly at full strength. We must be strategic." Daenerys glanced behind her where Regal rested in his wagon. The dragon let out a low rumble as if sensing the tension. Grey Worm and the Unsullied stood in formation, stoic. Gendry's Baratheon knights hovered on the flanks, their polished stags shining in the sun. The Northern and Vale men formed a wide ring to the right, while the Dothraki held the center, led by a grim-faced Kono. The Riverlanders had formed lines on the left under Edmure Tully's sigil. A formidable sight, but the Golden Company's discipline was legendary, their gear well-maintained. If they stood firm, it would be a bloody engagement indeed. She urged her horse forward a few paces, her voice low. "We'll set camp beyond their range and see if we can provoke negotiations. Tyrion, prepare a herald. Let's see if we can talk to their commander. If it fails, we fight." Jon agreed. Better to try words first. "We have no reason to shed unnecessary blood if there's a chance they'll stand down or open the gates." They descended the slope, halting at a safe distance where they raised pavilions. The men built barricades and dug shallow trenches, expecting a possible counterattack. Within hours, the battlefield lines were drawn. The Golden Company's earthen ramparts about a mile from the city gates. Daenerys' forces about half a mile behind, forming a mirror line. A tense hush settled over the fields. Ravens took flight, bearing final messages. Civilians from the outskirts fled in all directions, leaving behind rickety homes. The smell of sweat and fear mingled with the faint reek of the city's waste-laden moat. War loomed, stark and unavoidable. That evening, Tyrion rode forward under a white flag, accompanied by Ser Davos and a few others for protection. They negotiated with a Golden Company officer near the earthen ramparts. The exchange was brief and fruitless. The cell's words demanded that Daenerys lay down her claim and depart. Tyrion told them they'd be spared if they abandoned Cersei and let the city's gates open. The officer laughed in his face, citing their contract and reminding him that the Golden Company was famed for its loyalty to paying clients. No arrangement was reached. When Tyrion returned, he shook his head grimly. "They won't yield. They'll hold their ground. Cersei must have promised them a fortune, and her entire rule." Daenerys set her jaw. "Then we break them." At dawn, the armies clashed. The day began under a slate-gray sky, a clammy mist clinging to the fields. Men buckled on armor, laced boots, and sharpened weapons. Horses snorted in the crisp air. Daenerys donned her own leathers and furs, the Targaryen sigil emblazoned in red on her breast. She walked to Regal, who waited in the clearing, unchained for the first time in weeks. The dragon swung his head toward her, steam curling from his nostrils. She placed a palm on his neck, feeling his muscles tense with anticipation. "Are you ready?" she whispered in High Valyrian, searching his bright green eyes for understanding. Regal let out a low rumble, a vibrato that rippled through the damp grass. It was as if he, too, felt the finality of this moment. Jon came up behind her, wearing a mixture of leather and dark iron plates, long claws strapped at his side. "If you mean to fly him, be careful," he said. "The scorpions are many." She nodded. "I won't take him into direct range unless necessary. I'll watch for an opening. You lead the ground assault." Jon exhaled. "Yes, I'll be on the right flank with Grey Worm. The center will be the Dothraki charge, led by Kono and Gendry's knights. The left belongs to the Riverlanders and Vale. We'll attempt to encircle them. Tyrion and Davos will remain behind to coordinate reserves." She glanced at him, 1,000 unspoken words swirling between them. "May the gods be with us." He managed a grim half-smile. "We faced worse odds against the dead, but we had Drogon and Regal both at full strength then. Still, we're here now." With that, he turned and mounted his horse. Daenerys breathed in, steadying herself, and climbed onto the makeshift saddle strapped to Regal's back. The dragon hissed in discomfort for a moment, but then spread his wings tentatively. She double-checked the harness, her heart pounding as she remembered Drogon's unstoppable grace. Regal's posture felt different, less certain, as though he might falter. Yet she had no choice. She guided him forward, and the lines of men parted, giving them a clear path. The sight of the living queen astride a dragon stirred roars of encouragement among the troops. Daenerys raised her hand, summoning every ounce of regal bearing she possessed. She let her voice ring out for the realm, for the dawn we all fought for. Break their lines and free King's Landing from tyranny. A thunderous cheer erupted. War horns sounded, echoing across the misty fields. The Dothraki hooped and brandished their arcs. Gendry's knights lowered their lances. The northern foot soldiers set their shields. Grey Worm barked commands in Valyrian. The assembled ranks began to advance. Beyond them, the Golden Company stood in precise formation behind their ramparts, pikes bristling. Elephants stamped and trumpeted. Archers knocked arrows, waiting for the perfect range. Daenerys urged Regal into the air. He grunted, flapping once, twice. She felt the muscles strain beneath her. For a moment, he hung suspended above the ground, only a few feet of altitude. Then, with a guttural roar, he managed a burst of strength, climbing higher. Men below shouted in awe. She clenched the saddle, scanning the horizon for the city walls. Sure enough, she spotted scorpions lining the battlements, each manned by Lannister guards. Cersei had prepared well. She guided Regal in a wide arc to the right, out of immediate range. She would wait to see how the ground battle unfolded before risking a pass. Below, she glimpsed the lines of the living army surging forward. War cries filled the air. The Golden Company's crossbows loosed a volley, bolts whistling toward the Dothraki. Horses screamed, men toppled, but the wave pressed on. The northern archers returned fire, launching flaming arrows that arced and descended on the Sellswords. Some found their marks, though the Golden Company's disciplined shields blocked many. With a thunderous clash, the Dothraki slammed into the Sellsword front, hacking with their rocks. The Sellswords held firm, pikes bristling. Horses reared, gutted by sharpened stakes. The men of the north and the Vale circled around, trying to flank. Elephants charged, trampling lines of foot soldiers, crushing men underfoot. Gendry's knights galloped forward, lances piercing the sides of elephants or the ranks of pikemen, but not without heavy losses. The battlefield roiled with screams, steel, and the acrid smell of blood. From her vantage above, Daenerys felt a rush of dread. This was a slaughter on both sides. The Golden Company was as formidable as promised. She coaxed Regal closer, scanning for scorpions. She counted at least 6 large ones along the ramparts outside the city, plus mobile units among the Sellswords. If she dived too low, they would shoot him from the sky. Her teeth clenched. She needed a safe pass somewhere the scorpions weren't trained to unleash dragon fire on the enemy lines. But the Sellswords had spaced out their anti-dragon weapons cleverly, covering almost every angle. Below, the Unsullied methodically advanced, shields locked. Jon and Grey Worm led them, cutting down pockets of resistance. But the Golden Company pikes formed a deadly wall. Bodies piled up at the front line. The Dothraki who made it past that initial barrier circled behind, slashing from the rear. Elephants trumpeted in panic, some wounded and lashing out. The air was thick with the haze of dust and blood. Daenerys' heart hammered, men were dying in droves. She spotted an opening near the left flank where a group of scorpions had turned to track Rhaegal's flight. That left a stretch of Sellsword lines temporarily unguarded by the big weapons. With a surge of determination, Daenerys guided Rhaegal into a dive, focusing on that patch of the front line. "Dracarys," she shouted, praying the dragon's fire sac still worked at full capacity. Rhaegal released a torrent of flame, scorching a wide swath of the Golden Company ranks. Screams rose as men and horses were consumed. The line bent under the sudden onslaught. Some of the Sellswords panicked, dropping weapons to flee the inferno. A portion of the pike formation collapsed, allowing the Dothraki and Tully men to surge through. Daenerys pulled Rhaegal up, heart-pounding. She felt the jolt of his wings as they beat the air. A scorpion swiveled on the ground, aiming. She yanked on the reins, urging Rhaegal aside. The bolt hissed past, missing by mere feet. Rhaegal roared in pain as he twisted, his injured shoulder straining. Daenerys gasped, clinging to the saddle. They wobbled, nearly dropping in altitude, but Rhaegal managed to steady. Another scorpion bolt streaked upward, glinting in the sun, missing by a yard. "You are." Get Rhaegal back to the safe perimeter. Her breath came fast, adrenaline coursing. Yet that single pass had inflicted massive damage on the enemy's flank. That was the power of even a weakened dragon. Sensing opportunity, Grey Worm signaled a surge. The Unsullied advanced into the gap, their spears thrusting in lethal unison. Jon Snow rallied the northern men, hacking down the stunned Sellswords. The momentum began to shift. The Golden Company's center line, still formidable, tried to maintain discipline, but the battered flanks threatened to collapse inward. More archers fired from behind the Sellswords, but the chaos of the front line made it hard to hit the living army without risking their own. Elephants bellowed as Dothraki swung flaming rocks, panicking the beasts. Under the confusion, a portion of the Sellswords started to break rank, edging backward toward the city. But their commander, glimpsed in shining armor at the center, shouted orders, stiffening their resolve. Drummers pounded a martial rhythm. The Golden Company reformed, launching a counter-thrust with their pikes. Daenerys watched from above, cursing the discipline that kept them from scattering. She spotted a cluster of scorpions being wheeled into a new position near the center. If she attempted another pass, they might be waiting. Then she looked north and glimpsed Tyrion at the back lines, gesturing frantically. Reserves were moving forward, Riverlanders and more Baratheon knights, plus a handful of Vale men. They slammed into the Sellsword flank with renewed vigor. The slog turned brutal, men locked in vicious close combat. Carts overturned, dirt churned into mud with blood and gore. War horns sounded on both sides, each refusing to yield. Daenerys hovered above the carnage, searching for a chance to burn another portion of the enemy line without losing Rhaegal. She saw scorpions swiveling again, all aimed skyward. Some Sellswords pointed, shouting. She felt Rhaegal tense. They were easy targets if they tried another close pass. She clenched her jaw. If she did nothing, the ground battle might devolve into a stalemate. If she dove in, it might cost Rhaegal's life. Before she could decide, something else happened. From behind the Golden Company lines, the gates of the city opened. A mass of Lannister soldiers spilled out, presumably the City Watch and any loyal remnants. They charged in an attempt to flank Daenerys' left. But just as they moved, screams erupted inside King's Landing's walls. Daenerys squinted, trying to see over the ramparts. Billowing black smoke rose from the southwestern quadrant of the city, as though some internal sabotage had ignited. Her heart leapt. Perhaps Tyrion and Davos's plan had borne fruit. Rebels inside the city setting fires to sow chaos. Many of the Lannister men hesitated, turning to see what was happening behind them. That brief confusion caused the flank to falter. Jon, seizing the moment, drove the northern lines deeper into the Sellsword ranks, linking with Gendry's knights. Grey Worm led the Unsullied in an encirclement maneuver. Daenerys hovered, seeing the tide tilt in their favor. She willed Rhaegal to make one more pass. War horns blared. She guided the dragon in a cautious arc, breathing deeply as she counted scorpion placements. Some had turned to see if the city itself was under attack, their crews confused by the smoke rising from within. That was her chance. She dove. Dracarys. Rhaegal unleashed another wave of fire, scorching not the Sellsword's front line but the scorpion emplacements behind them. The scorpions erupted in flames, men screaming, wooden frames popping under the inferno. Daenerys glimpsed crossbow bolts sailing wide, shot in panic. One bolt grazed Rhaegal's tail, drawing a pained roar, but the dragon kept his flight. She pulled up again, heart hammering. That was enough. The scorpions near the center were ruined, lessening the biggest threat to her dragon. On the ground, the sight of the burning scorpions rocked the Golden Company's morale. Their once impenetrable line began to crack. They had lost their best defenses against a dragon. Even war-hardened Sellswords felt fear when faced with living flame from the sky. Men looked over their shoulders, saw the city in chaos, and realized they had no easy retreat. Some started discarding pikes, stumbling away. Others fought on, determined to uphold their contract or out of sheer desperation. But the ring tightened. Northern swords, unsullied spears, Dothraki araks, Baratheon lances, Tully steel, Vale maces, and onslaught from every direction. The ground turned slick with gore. Elephants, maddened by wounds, turned on their own lines, trampling Sellswords. The final pocket of Golden Company resistance formed around their commander, who attempted to rally them. Jon Snow and Grey Worm converged on that position, cutting through the last ring of pikes. The commander swung a massive sword, felling 2 Northmen, but Grey Worm sidestepped the blow and thrust his spear through the man's chest. With a guttural gasp, the Golden Company's leader crumpled. Panic seized the remainder. Hundreds threw down weapons, dropping to their knees or fleeing. The living host roared in victory, though battered and bloodied. The day was theirs. Daenerys circled overhead, swallowing back the surge of conflicting emotions. So many bodies littered the field, some of them her men, good soldiers from the north, the Vale, the Stormlands, the Riverlands. But the path to King's Landing was open. Already she saw loyal forces flooding across the battered ramparts and rampaging through the gates. Smoke billowed from within, suggesting sabotage or rebellion. She guided Rhaegal closer, trying to see if it was safe to enter. She spotted pockets of fighting near the gates, Lannister guards clashing with the living forces. Civilians cowered, some running onto the field in panic. She realized with a start that if they pressed forward too violently, innocents would be slaughtered. She brought Rhaegal down near the city's main gate, landing behind the lines of her own men. The shock of the dragon's arrival sent the last few Lannister defenders into flight. Archers on the walls tried to loose arrows, but most soared wide. A scorpion perched on the battlements was twisted at an awkward angle, likely jammed in the chaos. Daenerys dismounted, meeting Jon as he rode up on his horse, blood spattered on his armor. Tyrion appeared from the rear, face drawn with horror at the carnage, but relieved by the outcome. Jon surveyed the city gate. It's chaos inside. We should push in carefully. Half the city watch might stand down, but the other half could fight to the bitter end. Daenerys nodded, adjusting her sword belt. We take the Red Keep and we demand Cersei's surrender. If she refuses, we dethrone her by force. But tell the men, no raping, no pillaging. They are to protect innocents. Grey Worm arrived, saluting with his spear. Blood trickled down his forehead from a shallow cut. We have them on the run, your grace. The Lannister forces are scattered. Shall we breach the gate fully? Daenerys clenched her jaw. Yes, but keep the men under control. We're here to free the city, not destroy it. Grey Worm bowed and relayed orders in Valyrian. Unsullied ranks marched forward. Gendry's knights guided their horses through the rubble, forging a path for supply wagons. Dothraki fanned out, rounding up the last Sellswords who attempted to escape. The city gates, battered from within by the rebels, groaned open. Daenerys strode at the forefront, Rhaegal following at a cautious distance. Citizens peered out from alleys, eyes wide with fear. The stench of the city's refuse mingled with acrid smoke from burning buildings. She realized that some part of the southwestern district was ablaze, likely due to sabotage. Shouts rang out in the streets, with men in rags brandishing makeshift weapons and others seizing the chance to loot. Tyrion dismounted near her. We need to move swiftly or the city will tear itself apart. There's an entrance to the Red Keep up that main thoroughfare. If we can reach the keep and remove Cersei, the city watch might capitulate. Daenerys nodded. Lead on. Jon, you and Grey Worm see to the defenses. Tyrion, show me the way to the keep. Jon inclined his head. Be safe, he murmured, then turned to coordinate the ground forces. Daenerys, Tyrion, and a contingent of Unsullied pressed forward through the winding streets. Flames licked at wooden shutters. They passed a crowd of angry small folk beating a pair of Lannister guards in the street. When the crowd recognized Daenerys, some cheered, but others shrank back in terror, remembering rumors of the Mad King's daughter. She felt the weight of those stares. Soldiers parted them, ensuring no more senseless violence erupted. Deeper into the city, the clash of steel echoed from side alleys. Daenerys glimpsed Lannister loyalists in last stands, bravely or foolishly refusing to yield. She pressed on, trusting her men to handle pockets of resistance. Rhaegal lumbered behind them, occasionally releasing a roar that made the city tremble. The broad avenue leading to the Red Keep emerged ahead, flanked by statues of old Targaryen kings. Some had been defaced during Robert's rebellion, the stone dragons battered. Seeing them, Daenerys felt a swirl of conflicting heritage. Suddenly, a volley of scorpion bolts whistled from a battlement near the keep's outer wall. One bolt struck a building's facade, sending masonry raining down. Another soared overhead, missing Rhaegal by yards. The dragon roared, more from anger than pain this time, spewing fire that melted the scorpion's crew into shrieking silhouettes. Daenerys shielded her face from the heat, pressing forward through the swirling ash. The keep's gate loomed, partially shut, its portcullis lowered. Lannister men manned the walls, but fewer than she expected. Many must have deserted or been drawn to other fighting. A half-dozen scorpions were positioned along the ramparts, but some were unmanned. Tyrion pointed to a side gate near a collapsed section of wall, one of the vulnerabilities from previous sieges. "We can enter there." The Unsullied formed up, raising shields. A hail of arrows rained down. Soldiers groaned, but pressed on. They reached the side gate, hacking through a handful of loyalists. Daenerys stepped over the body of a captain in Lannister crimson, glancing at his lifeless face with numb sorrow. Beyond, a courtyard extended toward the keep's main doors, an imposing structure of red stone. She heard shouts inside, the clash of steel. Possibly the Queen's Guard or other loyal knights defending Cersei's seat of power. She spun to see if Rhaegal could follow through the gate. The opening was narrow, but the courtyard beyond might accommodate him. He squeezed through with a guttural snarl, scraping scaled flanks on the broken masonry. Dust billowed. Tyrion coughed, stumbling, but waved Daenerys on. She advanced across the courtyard, the Unsullied behind her. The keep's doors were barred from within, hammered shut. She shouted for men to bring a battering ram. They hefted a stout timber, slamming it repeatedly. Wood splintered. From above, arrows pinged off the Unsullied's shields. A voice rang out, magnified by the stone walls, "Daenerys Targaryen. You dare set foot in my keep." The mocking tone echoed, and Daenerys recognized it instantly, Cersei Lannister. Daenerys peered up. Sure enough, Cersei stood on a high balcony, clad in regal black, flanked by a handful of red-armored Queen's Guard. Her face was twisted in defiance. Smoke drifted around her from distant fires. Daenerys called back, her voice hoarse from the smoke. "Yield, Cersei. Your men are beaten, your city in chaos. End this." Cersei's laughter rolled down from on high, bitter. "You think I fear you? Dragon Queen, you have only one wounded beast. My archers still line these walls. My men will fight to the last drop of blood to protect their rightful queen." Daenerys' hands curled into fists. She forced composure into her voice. "Thousands more will die if you refuse to bend the knee. The city is done with you. Look around, your golden company is scattered, your gates broken. Let these people live." Cersei sneered. "These people? They are nothing but fleas. If they will not serve me, they can burn. Do your worst. I will not kneel to a Targaryen usurper." At that moment, a scorpion bolt streaked from another balcony overhead, aimed at Rhaegal's flank. Daenerys barely had time to shout in warning. The dragon lurched aside, the bolt scraping his scales, drawing a hiss of agony. Fury coiled inside Daenerys. She pointed to the battlement from which it came. "Dracarys!" Rhaegal roared, unleashing a torrent of flame that incinerated the scorpion crew. The masonry collapsed in a plume of dust. Cersei staggered back to avoid the heat, shielded by a stone pillar. The balcony quaked. Below, the battering ram smashed again, and the keep's doors gave way with a deafening crack. Unsullied poured inside, sweeping aside pockets of loyal knights. Daenerys followed, sword in hand, ignoring the arrow that whirred past her ear. She advanced through the grand foyer, stepping over rubble and broken columns. A cluster of Queen's Guard lunged to block her path. Two Unsullied engaged them, steel ringing on steel. Daenerys' breathing came quick as she parried an incoming strike. Her sword was not Valyrian steel, but the hours of practice under Ser Jorah's guidance served her well. She sidestepped, cut a Queen's Guard across his unprotected thigh. He fell with a groan. Another spearman finished him. The echoes of the fight reverberated through the vaulted halls. Tyrion caught up, shouting to Daenerys, "The throne room is this way." They rush along a corridor, the floor slick with broken glass. Mosaics on the walls depicted scenes of Targaryen conquest, Aegon the Conqueror, the Field of Fire. Old, battered icons. Flames flickered from overhead sconces, each corner thick with smoke. Archers loosed arrows at them from side corridors. The Unsullied responded with disciplined spear throws. Daenerys' heart pounded, her entire body alive with adrenaline. They burst into the throne room from a side entrance. The grand double doors at the front were sealed, presumably blocked by debris. The Iron Throne rose on its dais of twisted swords, a vision of fear and power beneath the high, soot-stained windows. At the foot of the dais stood Cersei, flanked by a handful of Queen's Guard, including a towering figure that could only be the undead Ser Gregor Clegane, the Mountain. Qyburn cowered nearby, his face streaked with blood and grime. The hall reeked of smoke and dust. Sunlight lanced through the windows, illuminating swirling motes in the air. Cersei met Daenerys' gaze with naked hatred. "So it comes to this. In the hall of the throne you claim is yours." Daenerys advanced, sword raised. The Unsullied fanned out behind her. "Surrender," she commanded. "This city has had enough death." Cersei's lips curved in a brittle smile. She stroked the hilt of a small dagger at her waist. "You want me to kneel? I refused once before." She gestured to Qyburn, who quivered, uncertain. "No more illusions, Qyburn. If the city burns, let it burn." Ser Gregor stepped forward, a hulking mass of plate armor. Beside Daenerys, Grey Worm tensed, spear at the ready. For a moment, no one moved. Tyrion edged to the side, glancing at Qyburn. "Don't be a fool," Tyrion spat. "She's lost. You can't save her. Surrender your queen." Qyburn opened his mouth, perhaps to speak, but Cersei hissed, "Traitor," and Ser Gregor's massive sword swung, decapitating the trembling hand with a single blow. Qyburn's head toppled. Gasps echoed in the hall. Blood pooled around the remains of the once cunning maester. Grey Worm lunged, spear aimed at the Mountain's chest. Metal clashed with metal. The spear snapped, the monstrous knight barely budging. Grey Worm ducked a colossal swing, dancing back. Another Unsullied tried to flank the Mountain but was cut down by a savage backhand. The Queen's Guard pressed forward, though two were quickly skewered by the disciplined spear thrusts of the Unsullied ranks. Daenerys circled, searching for a clear angle. Cersei retreated up the dais, eyes flicking for an escape route. In the swirl of chaos, Tyrion tried to call out for calm, but no one was listening. The Mountain roared, swinging a blade the size of a man's torso. Grey Worm rolled aside, sweat streaming down his face. The clash of steel was deafening. One of the Unsullied seized a dropped sword and joined Grey Worm, slashing at the Mountain's legs. Sparks flew. Ser Gregor let out a guttural growl, seemingly impervious. He smashed his gauntlet fist into the Unsullied's visor, caving it in with a sickening crunch. Another soldier took the fallen man's place, stabbing into the Mountain's side. The blade sank in, but Gregor did not flinch. He swung, decapitating the soldier in a single blow. The gore spattered the throne room floor. Cersei watched from the dais, an almost crazed light in her eyes. Daenerys advanced up the steps, ignoring the swirl of carnage behind her. She needed to stop Cersei now. If she surrendered or was captured, the fighting might cease. They locked eyes, the silver-haired queen and the golden-haired usurper. Cersei sneered, dagger in hand, her knuckles white. Daenerys held her sword level. "You have nowhere to run, Cersei. Your scorpions are gone, your city is in ashes. End this." Trembling with fury, Cersei spat, "Never." She lunged. Daenerys deflected the slash, stepping back. Cersei's skill with a blade was limited, but desperation gave her speed. They traded blows, steel ringing. Daenerys felt the sting of a cut on her arm as Cersei's dagger grazed her. She hissed, swinging her sword in a powerful arc Cersei barely blocked. The dagger nearly knocked from her hand. She stumbled, eyes wild. Behind them, Grey Worm and the remaining Unsullied cornered the Mountain, driving him back. More spears pierced his limbs, each wound oozing black blood. He flailed, smashing one soldier aside, but Grey Worm drove the tip of a halberd into his visor, jamming it into the slit. Ser Gregor roared, blindly swinging his sword. Another Unsullied pivoted behind him, slicing at the back of his knee. That combined effort brought the giant knight crashing down, though he still clawed at the men, refusing to die. Finally, Grey Worm ripped his visor open, revealing a discolored face with sunken eyes. With a grimace of revulsion, Grey Worm plunged the halberd into Gregor's skull, pinning it to the floor. The monstrous knight went still, an abomination undone. On the dais, Cersei shrieked as Daenerys' next strike knocked the dagger from her hand. She fell backward, tumbling onto the floor before the Iron Throne. Daenerys pointed her blade at Cersei's throat, breathing hard. "It's over," she managed, voice ragged. "Yield." Cersei glared, tears streaming, half from rage, half from despair. "My throne," she said in a trembling whisper, "stolen by a foreign whore with a crippled dragon." Her eyes flicked to the battered swords making up the throne behind her. She reached out as if to grasp one of the twisted metal armrests, but Daenerys pressed the sword tip closer. A single move would slash Cersei's throat. "Don't force me to kill you," Daenerys said, chest heaving. "I'll offer you mercy if you command your remaining men to stand down." Cersei's voice wavered. "Mercy from a Targaryen? Do you think me mad? You butchered my family, my city. I see no mercy in you." Daenerys' gaze flickered with a swirl of pain. "You left us no choice. You refused every chance to surrender. But I won't be your father or your brother. I won't destroy the city in mindless vengeance. This is your last opportunity. Surrender or face the consequences." For a heartbeat silence, smoke drifted through the battered windows, dust motes dancing in the golden light. Then Cersei, trembling with frustration, slowly bowed her head. She raised her hands empty in a reluctant gesture of defeat. Her voice cracked. "I yield." Relief flooded Daenerys, though it was tinged with bitterness. She motioned for the Unsullied to seize the fallen queen, pulling her to her feet with shackles. Tyrion let out a shuddering sigh. Grey Worm, spattered in blood, stood near the toppled mountain, panting. The throne room echoed with the moans of the wounded. Outside, the city rumbled, the chaos of battle winding down. Cersei's shoulders shook as she stared at the Iron Throne she had coveted, now lost. Daenerys stepped forward, resting a trembling hand on the cold metal. Her birthright overshadowed by the memory of countless dead, including her own dragon. She closed her eyes, recalling Drogon's roar, the faithful presence of Rhaegal, and all the men and women who had fallen to bring her here. This victory felt like a funeral pyre rather than a triumph. She turned to Tyrion. "Order the city watch to stand down. Send word to every corner, the war is over. Any who lay down arms will be spared. Any who resist will be arrested. Let them know their queen," she paused, the word choking in her throat. "Their queen shows mercy so that we might heal the realm." Tyrion nodded and rushed off to carry out her commands. Grey Worm dispatched a squad of Unsullied to ensure no further sabotage or ambush awaited them in the keep. Outside, the roars of Rhaegal echoed as if calling for his mother. Daenerys let out a slow breath, stepping down from the dais. She strode past the shackled Cersei, who hissed curses under her breath but was dragged away by soldiers. Daenerys closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks for all that was lost. The Iron Throne loomed behind her, harsh and cold. She had claimed it at a terrible cost, the death of Drogon, the death of thousands in Winterfell, the destruction left in her wake. She inhaled the smoky air, tasting ash. Then she stepped forward again, climbing the dais and turning to face the half-ruined throne room. Fires crackled in distant corridors and the wounded moaned. She was queen, but the price was everything. Jon Snow rushed in moments later, sword drawn, eye scanning for threats. Seeing that the fight was done, he lowered long claw, relief flooding his features. She descended from the throne dais, meeting him halfway. He took in her blood-spattered leathers, the cut on her arm, her haunted eyes. Gently he reached out and clasped her hand. The hush of the battered hall pressed in on them. The Targaryen sigils overhead seemed to watch from a distant past. "It's done," he whispered. "She surrendered?" Daenerys let out a trembling nod. "The city is ours. We've won." Jon's gaze roamed the carnage, the shattered columns, the broken men. "The cost, so many lost." Daenerys' voice caught. "I know." She squeezed his hand, tears glistening. "We must ensure it wasn't for nothing, that we built something better. No more tyranny." Jon looked at her, searching her face. Softly, he said, "You saved the world from the Night King, and you saved the city from further ruin by forcing her surrender. We'll see it through. Together." She swallowed, letting his steady presence anchor her. Outside, the horns began to sound, echoing among the city spires, the signal of the city watch standing down, the affirmation that the siege was over. The clang of distant weapons dropping to the cobblestones reached her ears. A battered hush settled over King's Landing as the news spread. Queen Cersei had fallen. A new queen had claimed the throne. Some might rejoice, some might tremble in fear. Either way, the realm would never be the same. Daenerys turned, casting one last look at the Iron Throne. The swords melted together in cruel lines, a testament to Aegon the Conqueror's forging by dragon fire. It no longer represented power to her, only sacrifice. She released Jon's hand, ascending the steps once more, placing a hand on the rough metal. Here, her ancestors had reigned, forging the 7 kingdoms in flame and blood. Would she be different? Or would the weight of rule forge her into another tyrant? She slowly sat upon it, her posture erect, shoulders squared. It felt cold beneath her. The swirl of the battle dust danced in the beams of light overhead. The queen had come home, crowned by victory and tragedy alike. Her eyes flickered with a resolve tempered by grief. Jon stood at the foot of the dais, gazing up at her. Grey Worm and the Unsullied formed a silent guard. Footsteps of others approached from behind: Tyrion, Davos, Gendry, men from the north and the Vale, all of them bearing witness to the final act of conquest. The hush stretched. Daenerys exhaled. "Let the realm know," she said softly, "that I am Daenerys of the House Targaryen, the first of my name, breaker of chains, the unburnt, the mother of dragons, and that I claim the Iron Throne to bring peace, not oppression. May the city and all of Westeros see a new dawn." For a moment, no one spoke. Then Tyrion stepped forward, kneeling. Davos followed, albeit with visible weariness. Grey Worm dropped to one knee. Gendry bowed his head. More and more the soldiers behind them bent the knee. Jon Snow stood, meeting her gaze, and slowly knelt as well, acknowledging her sovereignty. The battered throne room seemed to echo with the hushed sound of fealty. Outside, Rhaegal's roar resounded, half in pain, half in triumph. King's Landing had a new queen, forged by heartbreak, consecrated by the memory of a dragon lost to the night. Daenerys closed her eyes, feeling tears slip down her cheeks. Drogon was gone, sacrificed so that this moment could exist. She prayed silently to whatever gods might listen that she would use this power to mend the realm, to ensure no more devastation was wrought in her name. If there was any justice in the world, she would honor the cost. And so, in a red-soaked throne room strewn with broken swords and fallen men, Daenerys Targaryen rose to reign, her heart scarred, her dragon wounded but alive, and the realm trembling before the uncertain dawn of her rule.